So welcome everybody, good afternoon, and very exciting to launch the festival of our digital exhibition. Our website is going to be launched soon as well. But the students have put together a very special series of events over next 4 days, looking at various themes that have come up from the curation process of our exhibition. And today is the first theme that we are picking up, which is research. And this and the other days are all talking about processes that students have been using and developing to define their research, to define their architectural proposals, but also it's also to make a point that the projects that students are presenting are unfinished and are always developing. So yeah, we have a series of interesting talks lined up over next few days. So if you are interested, please go and look at our website, wsaondisplay.co.uk, and what's on, where you can find all the information about coming days. But today we are going to start off with Shade Abdul presenting her talk, Hidden Voices, Hidden Gems. And just to briefly introduce Shade, Shade is founder and director of Deft Space, which is an interdisciplinary architecture, urbanism, and research practice. The practice often collaborates on regeneration projects that aim to address socioeconomic inequalities and drive social change. Shade is also my colleague as she teaches on MAD's, which is Master in Architectural Design Program at WSA, a design research program. And she's leading a unit along with another speaker today, Radium, on urban commons. She is a member of London Borough of Newham's Design Review Panel and is also a member of Urban Design London's Environmental Design Review Panel. She is a fellow of Royal Society of Arts, and we are delighted, Shade, to have you with us and to kick off our digital festival. So over to you, Shade. Just before I move this over, if audience have got any questions, please put them in the Q&A button that you will see below in your screens. And at the end of the presentations, we will group those questions and ask to each presenter. So Shade, over to you.
Thank you, Iral, for a lovely introduction. Thank you for having me. It's great to be part of the festival. Looking forward to hearing all the other talks. So I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully you can see what I can see and I can get started. Can you see my screen? Yeah. Great. So this is a current project called Hidden Voices, Hidden Gems. It's a cross-collaboration, a cross-disciplinary collaboration with the London South Bank University Business School. And I'm going to take you through it. It's very much a project that's had hiccups. So I think it's a presentation of hiccups, but also a celebration of where the hiccups have taken us to, which is a positive development. So I should make this full screen. Bear with me a second. Sorry. Great. So I see my work. I describe the work that my practice does as sitting along the line of, or the description of, critical spatial practice. I am an architect by training, and I have worked in architectural practices. But I think where I found my practice now sort of sitting is that it takes different forms of media and processes to realize the key sort of social impact that I want to create. So sometimes the impact that I would like to develop in a project is not necessarily a building or a remodeling. Sometimes it's actually nothing, it's not anything physical at all. So where my work sits can best be described as critical spatial practice. So this is the project, this is the site of the project that I'm going to present. It's Bleil Lane in Peckham, London. It's a very diverse part of London, and it's also a very deprived part of Southwark. Southwark is very diverse. It's 46% ethnic minorities, and they're typically based south of the borough. And Bleil Lane is a part of Southwark that's received very little investment over the years, and it's seen sort of changes. It was once a thriving high street, but the core anchor businesses have moved out of the area, and it's kind of declined over the years. So these are some photos of what it looks like. As you can see, some big stores are still there, booths are still there, but it's a mix of business types, and it's typically run by ethnic minority people from ethnic minority backgrounds. So you can see, you know, it's also a place, I should also stress the positives, it's also a place where creatives are. So it has their pockets of creativity, their pockets where startup businesses are located, but the high street itself, which is the focus of the attention, is a little bit removed from the cultural elements of the area. So there's a bit of a separation, a bit of a divide, let's say. And the high street, which is led by, which has lots of ethnic minorities, they are not essentially benefiting from potential changes that might come or be coming in the area. So the gentrification, I guess, they're not necessarily benefiting from gentrification. So the project, my practice, along with LSBU Business Solution, LSBU Business School, submitted funding to Southwark Council. Southwark put out a funding opportunity for local businesses in the area, community groups in the area, to apply and to come up with innovative ideas to help businesses on high streets to recover post-pandemic. So we, LSBU, my practice, joined forces and really wanted to approach this in a way that was innovative to bring out different sets of skills. Me being the spatial designer, them being a business school where they can offer support in terms of business training, social media support, and also actually allow students to get life experiences, so life project opportunities. So this is the intervention that they had proposed. So an incubator, a space within the high street, occupying one of the premises on the high street, and it would be called Business Solution Centre. They've run a couple of these along Southeast London, but none in Southwark. So that was an opportunity to do that, to take over space. And my proposition was to run an installation, to have a series of 5 installations on the high street. And the installation would essentially would celebrate the diversity. It touched upon things that sort of arisen during the pandemic in terms of who is celebrated in the public realm. It really fitted into the discussion of statues, where we celebrate one single individual, historical figure usually. And I wanted to maybe sort of look at that and address that and see how we could celebrate multiple individuals, have multiplicity in the public realm, and also celebrate diversity, because diversity is what has made Peckham and Bleil Lane very interesting. So this was a quick sketch, very, very quick sketch at this point, because you're writing funding, as you might know, funding is all about writing text. And so we wanted to quickly just do a sketch to go along with the funding application. And we've just proposed some seating at the bottom of this installation. We were asked, the council liked the idea, so we were asked to elaborate more. It was a bit of a rushed application, so that we in order to support the application to get it through the line, we elaborated a bit more about how we could see this as, rather than two separate projects, but to see it as part of a kind of a system, I guess, where these two elements are supporting each other. So we start off with, collecting stories. The installation is about featuring not only photographs of people, but actually listening to audio recordings of the different business owners and why they've come to Rye Lane, and what brought them to Rye Lane, and how they've seen Rye Lane changed, and what they imagine Rye Lane could be in the future, what's its potential. So we would collect stories initially, and those would be of the traders. The stories would be installed onto the installation, and the installation itself would then begin to record stories of visitors to the high street. So it's a sort of like a conversational feedback. And then once that's all experienced on the installation, the idea is that once visitors have given us their insights, their stories, the students would then process what has been said to identify what the visitors have said. So visitors, we don't know what they might say, but for example, they might say, we would like so-and-so improved on the high street, or we would like the businesses to provide a different experience on the high street, or maybe we would like them to create social media or website support to support what they do. So there's digital retail experience alongside physical shopping experience. We don't know, but the idea is that the students would process this feedback, feed them back to the business forum, feed them back to the business forum, and then that would then allow them to develop a set of actions that could then be used to support the traders. Whatever has been actioned would then be fed back into the installation as updates of, this is the change that has happened. Let us know what you think about it. And again, it sort of becomes a loop where you're listening to, businesses are listening to visitors, and then essentially providing what visitors would like to see on their high street. So it's a project where it's engagement. It's about research, it's engagement, and it's using storytelling in an engaging way to really gather useful information from the community. So this is what it looked like in the second iteration, just to show the potential. It's again another quick proposal. The project is not really about aesthetics. It's about quickly kind of getting stuff out and making sure that people that we're communicating with, largely the council, understand the approach that we're taking. So again, this is what it looks like. And this is where people can speak into. We have an alternative slot. If people do not feel comfortable to actually speak into this installation, they could essentially post their thoughts on written notes and put it into that post-it slot. And then we would have photographs in these sort of glazed screens. So it's all very low tech. And then we, again, in discussions with the council, as we kind of kept moving forward with the project, we identified the 5 locations where they could be and where they could sit. Rye Lane is very built up, so trying to find locations where these installations could sit was very challenging. And we also had to amend the design. We had to remove the seating and make it as slimline as possible. So this is the top part of Rye Lane, where we had proposed to have 3, and then this is the bottom half of Rye Lane, very long street, where we proposed to have 2. So it was at this point when we again evolved the design. We're looking at changing the top of the structure of the installation to have solar panels, and the solar panels would then power the electronic devices, the recording devices within the installation. And also at this point, we were looking at programming, so that when you started talking into the installation, that could be picked up immediately, rather than using time to separate listening and talking into the installation. We wanted to use a programming and sensors to allow us to kind of make that very smooth, that interaction very smooth. And also we'd started to gather stories. It was at this point that the council said, actually, this structure is going to be, is not ideal for Rye Lane. It's going to be prone to vandalism. It's going to be prone to, it's going to block CCTV, and it's going to invite antisocial behavior. It's going to invite arson. All the thoughts, all the ideas of what could go wrong was kind of given to us. So one department had given us funding to do this. And another set of departments said, no, we cannot have this. It's going to be disastrous to have this on the high street. So we had to essentially think outside of the box. Again, at this point, they've given us a set of challenges to to sort of deal with. And one of the challenges was, how do you deal with structure on a pavement? Because we don't want to build foundations. So how do we deal with that? And our structure engineer has come up with some ideas of using a concrete box and filling the bottom with water. And that way we could essentially take the structure to site and then pour water to the concrete box and then make it very, very stable. So at this point, we're coming up with lots of ideas to meet the challenges. And we're told, actually, no, we don't want the structure at all. So, so where we are at is that we've removed the structure, so there is no structure whatsoever, and we are looking at addressing some of the key issues that are still there. So one of the key issues around Rye Lane is wayfinding. There are lots of businesses on the high street, and some are tucked away within arcades that are not completely entirely visible from the high street. So we are going to create wayfinding using vinyls that are going to be put on the pavement. And we're going to have what is called sound walking, which can be accessed through mobile devices. So when you arrive on Rye Lane, you will access the project website, where you will have an illustrated map of different walks, and you'll be listening to an audio walk of your choice through the high street. And the idea is that by listening to some of these hidden voices, then you can discover some of the hidden gems on Rye Lane. So this is where we are in terms of the project. It will, we're aiming to have the project live running in the beginning of September. So I'm just going to play, I think I can do it. I'm just going to play a recording of a typical
Sade, sorry to interrupt. We were not able to hear the volume.
Sorry, bear with me a second. Can you hear it?
It's very faint and
very faint. Okay, I'm gonna.
You need to share your screen, and then when you share the screen, you need to click share sound.
Not quite sure how to. Bear with me a second.
So you will need to exit the share screen. You share your screen again, and then click the share sound.
Sorry, I need to share the screen again.
Yeah, so you need to unshare your screen, and then share your screen again. Before you click which window, there's a little box underneath saying share sound. Okay, can you see the SoundCloud screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, apologies for that. Is that clear? It's not clear.
Sade, I don't know if you can increase the volume of your...
Sorry, what's that?
If you can increase the volume of your SoundCloud player, maybe.
Okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, everything is
max. Yes.
So everything is loud on my side, and I think also on screen. So let's try that again.
Kind of plans to pick up this business. We come to the Rye Lane market in the arcade. Only about 9 months ago, in and around Peckham all my life, practically, or all my life that I remember, because when I was younger, I was in West London. But from about 7 years old onwards, I've been always from Brixton, Peckham, Camberwell. So this is my area. And yes, I'm here helping my parents to get this business up and running in the Rye Lane market, as I said. It's called 35 Americas. America's the continent. We call it 35, but the whole continent, 35 nations in the American continent. And there's something that troubles 35 nations, as well as other native nations and nations of West African descent that were taken over, forced over.
Hi, Shade. Sorry, can you hear?
Sorry, what's that?
Sorry, the volume is real. The voice is really breaking up. So
Okay.
I suggest maybe if you can share that link in the chat, maybe people can take that link and save it to listen later.
Okay, perfect. I will do that.
Sorry.
No problem, no problem. I just need to do some adjustment to my screen here. I'll stop sharing and see. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's it. That's a sample of the recording that we've taken so far. And the idea is that that would then be edited so that there's narration and you're guided on the walk on the high street. So there'll be a few walks on the high street. And the idea is that you, by listening to some of the voices that aren't so prominent in the area, then you might discover some of the businesses and then, yeah. It's about bringing culture and also bringing business support to businesses that need support to recover from the pandemic. So that's, thank you very much for listening. Sorry about the technical issues, but I hope it was, yeah, it was good for you to listen to.
Thanks, Shade. I'm sure the link would be of interest, and Radium has kindly shared it on chat. So if audience want to go and listen to that recording, they can see the link in the chat. If there are any questions, I would encourage people to send us those questions via Q&A. Meanwhile, Shade, I have a question for you. Maybe you can,
yeah.
you can reflect. Given the theme of this year's exhibition is on process, and it seemed that your process is very open-ended. I was wondering whether you can reflect on two themes. One is around the role of visualizations, so your sketches and how that played a role in you securing the funding, getting people excited. And the second is on the role of stakeholder engagement and the things that a student or somebody trying to do stakeholder engagement, not very experienced, would need to be mindful of.
Okay, it's interesting because there are two sort of stages or two project lives that have just occurred. So the first one didn't really, the engagement would sort of happen through this audio storytelling, and it's very subtle, sort of listening to businesses and then putting it on the installation and then allowing interaction with the installation to then continue that process of gathering. And the installation, we imagined at that point being the tool for finding out what the community would like to see happen on this high street. So the installation was the research tool, let's say. In the second stage, the second life, there is no installations, there is no research tool. So what we are actually now doing is we've got 3 key stages of co-design. So there's initial consultation about this project where there will be a graphic element, wayfinding element, and then this audio recording. But the wayfinding element, we want engagement with businesses about what that looks like. So the key 3 stages. And as though the design develops and the audio also gets developed, we will be sharing that with the business owners. And then once that's done and implemented as a cultural element, then also we still want to have that element of visitors recording stories, and they can record on their mobile. What you just listened to was recorded on my iPhone, on my smartphone, and they'll be able to do the same, record their stories and send it by email to our project account. And so again, it's still that sort of listening to the community and giving them sort of agency to really kind of influence what happens on this high street. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. Again, I would encourage audience to send us questions via the Q&A function. Yeah, I think it was really interesting because I was looking at South Bank Center and how that has developed through small installations over time, really temporary small installations, gaining momentum and then becoming permanent fixtures. And I think this reminded me of that sort of transitional design where things evolve slowly and steadily over time. Maybe I can ask another question, Sade. What do you see about the role of architectural education in enabling professionals like you to become change makers? What is it from your architectural education that you value the most at this point in time?
I feel like my education is also going through a second life. Lifespan or life stage. So when I was studying, it was a long time ago and it was very different. It was but now I feel that I'm going through a different stage where teaching actually is opening up opportunities to discuss with students. So we're thinking together and putting ideas together of how we can make changes in society. So in the unit, the studio that I teach with Radium, we're very much interested in getting students to really be proactive and really lead the discussions, and so we can get their insights. Because I think it's the way that we approach teaching is that it's less of a transmission. It's not about us transmitting our knowledge to the students and then rendering them very passive, but actually no, we want to be able to have a sort of not even a two-way relationship, but we want to have multiple relationships going across the studio and discussions, and that really helps. I value that because then it's helping me also in terms of thinking. So we are all teaching each other.
A true lifelong learner then,
Yes, totally.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us, Sade. And I will now move on to our second speaker for the day, Stephen Kite. Stephen joined the Welsh School of Architecture in 2007 from Newcastle University, where he was degree program director of BA in Architectural Studies. He has a PhD in architectural history and theory and has written and published widely in this field. He is a registered architect with many years of experience of full-time practice prior to entering academia in London and beyond. And he has worked at different levels from an associate to a project leader. He retired from WSA in 2018. And today he is joining us to give a talk titled Shaping the Surface, Exploring Quality of Materiality and Surface in British Architectural Design. So very welcome to Stephen Kite, and over to you. You are muted, Stephen, so we...
Okay, there. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, pleasure to join you. I'll just try and share the screen now. I'm going to full screen, I hope.
Not yet.
Not yet. Or is it all right like that, or would you prefer full screen?
We will be fine like this, Stefan, if it doesn't work at your end.
Wait a minute, slideshow. There we are. How's that? Yes, that's working, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's full screen now.
I think the only thing is the slides, when they come up, they'll be cut off a bit.
It seems fine at our
right.
end.
I can see your pictures over my slides, but is everyone seeing that full screen?
Yes.
All right, no problem, no problem. Okay, this brief exploration into the qualities of materiality and surface in British architectural design is based on research into my book, Shaping the Surface, Materiality and the History of British Architecture, 1840 to 2000. which will be published by Bloomsbury later this year. The book picks up on a trait that in the Englishness of English art of 1956, the architectural historian Nicolaus Pevsner identified as a national mania for beautiful surface quality and an acute pleasure in the overall decoration of a surface. In its allotted period of 1840 to 2000, the book traces this sensibility to surface in the history of British architecture through a selection of key cultural moments and movements from the High Victorian, the arts and crafts, to brutalism, postmodernism, and the new materiality. In the short time available, I shall focus on the picturesque. British visual culture is an import-export one, with the stress on imported ideas and models. However, the picturesque can be claimed as a genuinely British export, with its literary romanticism, its appetite for surface texture and weathering, and its aesthetics of bricolage. In researching this book, I expected the picturesque to be an important component, but even I was surprised at how important it proved to be, turning up in the most unexpectedly modernist of corners. And of course, it is hardly necessary to stress the importance of the Welsh contribution to ideas of the picturesque, with, for example, artists such as Richard Wilson and the Wye Valley landscape, wherein William Gilpin founded the picturesque school in his observations on the River Wye of 1782. Returning to Pevsner, as in Perpendicular Architecture or Elizabethan Hardwick Hall, he writes of a great desire to stress the surface as a flat surface by patterning, to put linearity and line before body, of a tendency to spatial compartmentation by flat wall planes, and a resistance to moulding space. It is the difference we find between the cathedrals of, say, Salisbury and Chartres. It has been said that nationality is an address, not a consciousness. A lot of things happen at that address. More problematic are the attempts to elide the address with a consciousness, the troubling blood and soil aspects of attempts like Pevsner's towards a British geography of art, a Kunstgeography. At the same time, distinctive architectures did develop within the boundaries of this complicated archipelago. They do describe sites where shifting groups of peoples and cultures have consistently made buildings within a vortex of ideas, topography, climate, politics, and manners that have engendered recognizable patterns and tendencies, as in those affecting the surfaces and materiality of architecture. The book also stresses the value of Britain's continuous importation of theories, models, and people, the crucial émigré contribution, for example. As for exports, it has increasingly been the case that many British architects have sought their best opportunities abroad. James Stirling's masterpiece is in Stuttgart, Germany, for example. Most good histories of modernism begin with William Morris and Philip Webb's Red House of 1858-9 as an icon of modernity. Modern and picturesque in its functional L-plan of Ruskinian changefulness, in the raw expression of its local red brickwork and the romantic profile of its homely roofs, oriel, and tall chimneys. Yet imagine if Webb's 1864 scheme to extend it into a palace of art to house the Burne-Joneses had been realized, as I have reconstructed here based on Webb's drawings. Then to the red brickwork would have been added the entire Kent material palette of half timber and tile hanging. And the well court, barely defined by the L plan, would have become the real hortus conclusus or garden room Morris wanted, as inspired by the medieval manuscripts he loved, such as this Roman de la Rose. This manuscript, as in my analysis on the right, presents a non-perspectival layering of the elements of wall and gate, meadow, fruit trees, fountain and trellis in a flat, compressed space. Just as in the Palace of Art on the far right, we can discover an equivalent layering of the well house and the rich surfaces of the Burne-Jones wing. The trellis of the outdoor room of Red House's Hortus Conclusus inspired Morris's first wallpaper design of 1862, his trellis, where again we find a shallow three-layer space, the architectonic grid of the trellis itself, the strong organic flowing lines of branch, flower and foliage, and the flitting accents of the birds, drawn by Philip Webb himself. Or the interior of Morris's long drawing room at Kelmscott House, with its ordered fusion of embossed and painted furniture, curtains and tapestries, layer upon layer. Something else of great importance to the surface theme is going on here. John Ruskin and William Morris's stress on the vital contribution of the artisan has the effect of eliding the high and low arts. Architecture and the decorative arts come to occupy the same space. Ornament slips its high art architectural moorings to migrate across the surfaces of other crafted objects, as in the grand Broadwood piano and carpets of the luxurious interior Morris created for the Greek consul at Holland Park on the left, or in this more ordinary interior on the right, although one still very rich to our modernist sensibilities. Well, the book continues to explore the arts and crafts in the smooth and rough surfaces of the architects George Frederick Bodley and Edward Pryor, and the act of carving the surface in Edwardian and interwar architecture and sculpture, as here where Henry Moore is carving the west wind in the late 1920s for the facade of Charles Holden's 55 Broadway, the skyscraper headquarters of the London Underground. The picturesque theme gained a powerful impetus in the interwar and World War II years, especially in the pages of the Architectural Review, which advanced its picturesque modernist agenda through vivid syntheses of writing and photographic and graphic imagery, especially in the brilliant townscape essays of Gordon Cullen. Inspired by the publication of Christopher Huss's The Picturesque of 1927, the editor of the Architectural Review, Hubert de Cronin Hastings, using the pseudonym Ivor de Wolfe, described a national picture-making aptitude, using the picturesque as a covert way to introduce the virtues of modernist architecture and city planning to, quote, my non-technical fellow countrymen. In January 1944, writing as the editor, the review published his Exterior Furnishing or Sharawagi, the art of making urban landscape. Sharawagi has an uncertain etymology, but can be traced back to 1685 when Sir William Temple described it as a term used by the Chinese to describe the irregular beauty of their gardens. Kenneth Rowntree, as here, illustrated Sharawagi with a striking urban panorama, which takes in its sweep a decorator's shop, high modernist flats, a cottage ornée, a Victorian pub, and the industrial icons of signal, lighthouse, and gasometer. In his caption to this image, Hastings enjoins his readers to match the variety of shape, pattern, and texture in the ornaments, wallpapers, and fabrics with an equally generous variety of shape, pattern, texture, and vegetation in our urban exteriors. In this panorama, as interior pattern becomes exterior pattern, this modernist trajectory might remind us of those trends we identified in Morris and the arts and crafts, whereby high and low art, architecture and ornament, public and domestic, interior and exterior, house and garden become elided into a continuum of layered surface pattern. Make High Point lie down with the Victorian pub and the barge-boarded villa, declares Hastings. High Point is the neo-Corbusian tower that looms above the cottage ornée. High Point 1 was built in 1933-5 in Highgate, London, by the Russian émigré architect Bertolt Lebetkin and his team Tecton. A gleaming white 8-story slab of unimpeachable international style credentials, and in fact rather difficult to marry with the Victorian pub. The second High Point 2 of 1936-8, as here, was much more controversially amenable in its tunings of its surface palette to the picturesque English scene. In its facade making, concrete fins frame panels of brickwork, and then there are the notorious surreal caryatids that support the canopy of the porte cochere. Flatness and surface is inherent in the cut and paste urbanism of Gordon Cullen's townscape. As he stated, urban landscape is first and foremost a problem of appearance, of surface. Here, an illustration, one of his essays, The Wall in the Architectural Review, and a proposal for London's Bankside that also appeared in the fully published Townscape book. In World War II, bombing and the Blitz every day produced starker images of urban bricolage, as on the left in Kenneth Rowntree's cover for the January 1944 Architectural Review, where his decoupage of Alva Alto's Paimio Sanatorium of 1932 offers a post-war vision of the National Health Service. And on the right, in John Piper's neo-romanticist drawing of a Bond church in Bristol. In his review article on the Architecture of Destruction of July 1941, Piper strove to see beyond the horror of these ruins manufactured in a night, how these instant ruins could be as picturesquely poetic as a travel book watercolor. James Stirling is a key figure in our surface stories in the post-World War II period. As a neo-brutalist and an avowed modernist who later demonstrated strong postmodernist tendencies, although he himself always rejected the POMO label. Yet in his 1968 essay, Revenge of the Picturesque, English Architectural Polemics, 1945-65, the key international modernist critic, Rayner Banham, accused many key modernists, such as Allison and Peter Smithson, and Stirling himself, as turning aside from the sane and rational design method of Le Corbusier and succumbing to the empiricism and compromises of the picturesque. He even described Stirling and Gowan's internationally celebrated Leicester University engineering building as, quote, an asymmetrical composition of towers and low buildings that fully deserves the name of picturesque. Here, the surfaces are skins of hard red Accrington brick, Dutch clay tiles, and industrial patent glazing. At the same time, the faceted and chamfered volumes imply depth. The building's forceful expression is evocative of William Butterfield's high Victorian pugnacity. In Stirling's more postmodern turn, the fascination with surface pattern and material richness becomes yet more evident. As in the Claw Gallery extension to Tate Britain, the Arcadian picturesque influences upon Stirling are complex, coming as they do from Schinkel's work at Charlottenhof near Potsdam in Berlin, and deriving in turn from the inspiration of the British architect John Nash and landscape architect Humphrey Repton upon German design of the 19th century. Well, the book has to end somewhere, and so does this short talk, and I chose to close it with the new materiality of Caruso St. John's New Art Gallery, which opened at the turn of the new century on 15th of February 2000. The Swiss school and the ideas of Adolf Loos are important to Walsall, but so in many ways of surface and volume, to end where we began, it is Hardwick Hall. Caruso St. John described their gallery, quote, as being like a big house to be explored and discovered by visitors as they move between floors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. If the audience have any questions, please send us through the Q&A function below. Stephen, really interesting to see through these different representations from different eras, and I'm a learner in architectural theory and history. So one of the questions that I can ask while we wait to hear from the audience is related to our second day of festival, which is around representations. And maybe you can tell us a bit more about how the materiality of representations themselves have changed and evolved over time, and any impact that might have had on the materiality of the buildings.
Right. By representation in that sense, do you mean the actual process of drawing?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Yes. Well, yes, clearly there's a synergy between thinking about material and the way you represent it, which you can see even in the few images I've shown here. You can see going on. I mean, for example, this idea of layering is this idea of a sort of flat isotropic space, this shallow space. You can see in Morris's trellis design that idea is very strongly there. One could cite many examples. To go to the very last example, that if you remember that wonderful up axonometric by James Stirling of the Claw Gallery, you can see in that, which he had to show to the Queen Mother, for example, who looked rather bemused trying to. It's a drawing architects. It's a sort of Schwazi-inspired kind of drawing that architects readily grasp, but to show that to a layperson. But you can see in that an architect who is clearly exploring the processes of surface and materiality very strongly. In the book itself, I have a number of sketches as well where Stirling is exploring that Arcadian composition, which those of you who know Tate Britain forms that delightful little garden and enclave at the side of the Tate Britain, which sadly is not used as an entrance anymore. It's become a back door, and people used to readily go in and out of that entrance to the Claw Gallery. Now it's become a back entrance. Even the front entrance of the Tate has become a sort of side entrance as well. So in those representations, I could go on this fascinating. So I'll give one more example. The example of polychromy. The book opens with a lot of discussion. I showed you that drawing by William Butterfield. Not the drawing, the photograph of All Saints Margaret Street. But John Ruskin was hugely important in directing British architecture towards this feeling for surface in the way he drew and rendered Venetian architecture. So when you think back upon it, we take it for granted that Victorian architecture looks like St Pancras Station, but it wasn't a foregone conclusion. It's because of people like Ruskin gave this curious idea that late modernist British architecture in the high Victorian period should have these extraordinary polychromatic surfaces. Why didn't it all develop like the Crystal Palace and become a much more skeletal architecture? Well, it didn't because partly because of an innate sensibility to surface, as I've already stressed, which you can see in early Gothic architecture, but partly because of thinkers and representations and the force of ideas and the way that enters the discourse.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for joining us today. And
yes.
Yes, we will now move to our next speaker, who is Monisha Margaret Peter. She is a doctorate research student here and also a tutor in MA in Urban Design program at the Welsh School of Architecture. She specializes in research around the anticipation of a more just and humanitarian city futures. Her presentation today is entitled "The Refugee City, the Underlying Values in the Alternative Practices of Urbanism in Amsterdam." So over to Monisha.
Thanks very much, Shiral, for that presentation, for the introduction, and thanks to the others who presented as well. Fascinating stuff. So thanks for having me. Let me get started with my PhD work in progress. I'll start sharing my screen. Just confirm if you can see the file, please.
We can see the PDF.
All right, brilliant.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. So my work looks at the refugee city as a conceptual lens to analyze values which underlie practices of urbanism in the context of the contemporary city. For the purpose of my case study, I chose Amsterdam mainly to look and explore what are these practices that are inclusive, and more than that, to question what values are which underlie practices that are inclusive in the context of contemporary urbanism. So my broad objectives were to think of the city and explore what are these inclusive practices or alternative practices that can be considered truly inclusive, and to also frame the refugee city as a lens using which we can explore these concepts or questions of justice in the city, humanitarian justice and solidarity. So before I start explaining my project, I just want to contextualize my research within the current context of migration. At the moment, the recent statistics released by the UNHCR says that there are around 89.3 million people who are displaced, out of which only 4.6 million people are asylum seekers. The image on the lower half of the screen is an interesting map where you begin to notice the dynamics and the change of tensions across a global context, where you begin to see that most of displacement is taking place in the global south. And a majority of the host countries which actually host refugees are not high-income countries, but they're actually low and middle-income countries. 83% of those displaced are hosted in low and middle-income countries. So now, bearing that in mind, I then just want to quickly fast forward to my project. So I am thinking of the refugee city as a lens. And before I pose the question, I just want you to take a moment and think of when someone says refugee city, what are the first things that come to your mind? So the image in front of you is from 1991, where Albanian refugees or Albanian asylum seekers had landed on Italian shores, and they were refused asylum on two grounds. First, because the Italian government at that time questioned if they were actually refugees, because they said that they could not qualify as political refugees, and they were more migrants, economic migrants. The second question was that it was ridden with populism and with exclusion. So when I start framing the refugee city, when I start thinking about inclusive practices of urbanism, I first want to take a step back and start looking at what are these exclusive practices. And so within the context of exclusion, I look at 1991 and the Albanian refugees being excluded, denied right to asylum in Italian shores. Now, the next example that I placed before you is now fast forward to 2021, 2022, more recently, you begin to see a shift in dynamics that from being denied political asylum or being denied asylum, you begin to see that countries and governments are beginning to redirect asylum, to in fact deny them the fact that they have the right to choose asylum. This raises questions for ethical concerns again. And interestingly, this was first proposed by Denmark in 2021 last year, and then the UK government soon followed this Rwandan plan, which was then stalled by the European High Court, and it hasn't gone forward. So this concept of somehow redirecting asylum seekers to Rwanda to seek asylum. So now within this context, if you were to then begin to look at what does the refugee city mean, or what does it look like? This image is from the Zatari camp from Jordan, where Syrian refugees in the 2014-2015 refugee crisis, around 115,000 residents have now settled in the Zatari refugee camp, 12 districts, 6,000 shops, and you begin to see this kind of rough emerging temporary settlements, which can some argue are the refugee city. But against this, I begin to look at practices that are in the contemporary city. How do you think about refuge in a context which is so driven by exclusion and debates of nationalism and populism? So for that reason, in order to look at these alternative practices in the contemporary city, I chose Amsterdam as my case study. And I'm exploring practices of inclusion or shelters that are provided to rejected asylum seekers, undocumented migrants, as we refer to them in literature, in order to take a neutral stance. So I'm exploring and evaluating this 24-hour shelter program put forward by Amsterdam, along with 5 other Dutch municipalities, which provide shelter for a set period of time for 18 months for undocumented residents, undocumented migrants who are rejected asylum. So the 2 images on the right are taken from 2010 and 2012, where you have these groups of undocumented refugees who began to make themselves feel visible in public space and demand for their rights, for free shelter, for freedom. And then I think I'm paving this within that context of a 21st century inclusive city and beginning to look at what are these practices and values which can be called inclusive. Again, going back to the broader debates of are undocumented migrants, are they refugees? And then I have these 2 images side by side from 2 of the leading NGO groups that work in Amsterdam. And since migration is such a complex topic, and especially because undocumented migrants are usually surrounded by this concept of illegality and criminalization, I begin to first look at how are they excluded? Why is it important to think of shelters or spaces in the city that can be tolerant or include these excluded groups of people who are vulnerable? So my case study looks at the National Aliens Facility, which is the LVV program in Amsterdam. They have 7 shelters across the city which provide a refuge and shelter for undocumented migrants. Prior to the LVV was put forward in 2017-18. Amsterdam is one of the more inclusive cities. It kind of fought for the BBB, which is the bed, breakfast, and bath facilities, which were night shelters. So undocumented migrants were allowed to stay the night. They were given food, and they were allowed to get some sort of money subsistence, but they were not allowed to stay during the day. Tracing this back, before the BBB, as I said earlier, in 2010 and 2012, you had undocumented migrants who were squatting empty buildings in Amsterdam. And you begin to see that there was this activism from the grassroots level, which was beginning to shift the conversation around illegality with surrounded undocumented migrants. And the image on the right is from the early tent campments in 2012, with undocumented migrants had squatted central city location, residential plot. And then this specific instance began to garner a lot of media coverage. The map on the left is a rough map to just plot out the different locations that were squat between 2010 and 2012 and 2018. And then one of my research also looked at these before and after snapshots of these spaces. So the image on the top is when the police evacuated them in 2012, and then the bottom image shows the same image that was taken earlier this year. And you begin to see that these emerging boundaries and borders and the debate, even at a national scale, at an international scale, and at the micro scale, that this whole dynamic of borders, exclusion, inclusion begins to make itself more vividly readable in the city. So my field work, I did in-depth interviews, semi-structured interviews. I visited 4 locations out of the 7. 3, I was denied access because of COVID. And I also attended a conference that was led and organized by undocumented migrants in Amsterdam. So now the next sequence of images, I'm very quickly going to just run across a few of the images that I took from these shelters in order to paint a picture of, would inclusive urbanism look like this, or do we need to further question the values behind these practices? So just a quick context, currently in Amsterdam, there are around, some estimates say that there are 10,000 undocumented migrants. It's interesting to note that the municipality has come up with a proposal with 500 shelter spaces. So 500 in the face of a larger need. So a couple of images, starting off with this particular image is taken from a primary shelter location in the heart of the city. You begin to see that these images on display are painted by the residents themselves from the shelter. It's all about welcoming, changing the narrative about inclusion. So this is the welcome reception that you get. Also some very interesting spaces and communal spaces that are inviting. You begin to see that there is a so-called municipal activism to promote a certain amount of inclusion by creating these spaces of inclusion in terms of communal spaces, open spaces, conversation, places where volunteers could donate stuff and then residents can choose to pick what they need based on their need. Spaces for leisure, for exercise and activity. The paintings on the wall were all made by the residents, part of the art classes. So there's a lot of emphasis on skills and network and building of existing skills. Again, images just to capture the atmosphere or the environment that they operate in. This is what the world sees. So you begin to see these lounges, there's a lot of greenery, music spaces, and then book reading spaces. But then once you begin to pass through what the world sees and you begin to identify these notes. So you begin to see there's a lot of rules in place. It's a lot of monitoring and surveillance and control. And you begin to see these small instances like the security asks you to show your pass. You need to be back by 11 o'clock. These couple of snapshots is from the municipality, especially during COVID, when it was a great help especially from the interviews, because these shelters helped to take the burden from the homeless shelters. Mainly these images are all about where to find access to resources. You can still access healthcare in the Netherlands, and also some housekeeping notes like taking responsibility, sharing the spaces, managing the spaces. But again, the underlying value here is, I think, about surveillance and control and management rather than really inclusion or tolerance. A couple of images from the communal spaces. So each floor has similar structures. Laundry shared spaces, kitchens, communal kitchens, and then now moving into where your personal space or sense of belonging. So the way that sense of belonging and responsibility is framed through these programs is that it's about taking ownership. It's about having your own space or own lockers, and about having privacy. You're able to digitally use your tag to enter and leave a location. But again, it's about who gets to leave, who gets to enter, being monitored. So it's to question these values behind these practices, and also to think of where we can find middle ground in terms of pragmatic alternatives for the future. So at the end of the day, coming back to the actual spaces of refuge or shelter, one of the highlights was the BBB were overcrowded. You had over 6 or 7 people in a shared room, but the LVV that you see on the screen is, they took into consideration that now the spaces are shared by 2 people, and the spaces are shared by members of the same gender. Families are not allowed in the LVV. Children are not allowed in the LVV. Again, it's for single people who are rejected asylum seekers. So at the end, moving forward, so beyond control and surveillance, what is the outcome? What are the positives that you can begin to unpack from these practices of alternative inclusive urbanism? It helps to reinforce the importance of community, of working together with networks of NGOs, of being able to be receptive, to be able to hear their stories. The image from the left is taken from this shelter where they had these drop-in sessions and clinics where undocumented migrants were able to learn a language, the Dutch language, and to also participate and ask questions. Once you begin to move away from the bureaucratic, from the what the municipality offers, you begin to then see that there's, in Amsterdam alone, there are over 65 organizations which work specifically with undocumented migrants in the city. And so these practices involve day shelters, spaces of community building, places of language sessions, and special houses for mothers and refuge, people who are seeking refuge in moments of crisis, which do not form part of the LVV. So you begin to see the importance of these networks and organizations. And then from the interviews, I've completed my interviews. One of the main questions that I have is looking broadly at efficiency, equity, and equality, and also understanding the tensions between these different themes, mainly to look at, is it control, surveillance? Is it pragmatic politics, solidarity, humanitarian justice? And looking at where you can meet a middle ground and seeing for ways forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Monisha. A reminder to the audience to send questions via Q&A if they have any for Monisha. But Monisha, maybe I can ask you a question meanwhile. I have a student in MAD who is looking at inclusive campus, and I was just thinking about your project and wondering from the point of view of that kind of university campuses, which are also quite a big part of a city, what lessons can we learn to make our university campuses more welcoming and inclusive for people who are seeking shelter and refuge in uncertain and stressful times?
Thanks, Hiral, for that question. And in fact, this goes back to the process, the theme. One of the issues, or one of the aspects that I had to struggle with in my PhD personally, is when you make these moral claims, they are always rooted in relational aspects. It's not possible to just look at the micro aspects of just a program. You can question me by just looking at this program. How can you say Amsterdam is inclusive or exclusive? Because especially conversations about inclusion can be so broad and so generic. You can look at inclusion in terms of accessibility. You can look at inclusion in terms of diversity and conversations that are difficult to have. And then when you begin to look at legal, so in the context of university campuses, again, my first question would be inclusion in terms of what? So if it's again in terms of migration, then my work is featuring looking at questions that find it difficult to situate itself at a specific level. And I always find it that I have to keep moving across different levels. So in that case, I think going back to my framework of values, in order to be able to truly have a real conversation about inclusion, I think we'll have to question those values. If it's, I think, swap the conversation and look at exclusion. On what criteria are you being excluded, and is it fair and is it just? I think once you begin to then question that, you then begin to see, then, because at the end of the day, you have to make choices and priorities. Yes, and to try to mainly to include, I think it's a very philosophical way of thinking about the overall good over than just a private view.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Monisha. I think I would now move on to Radium, but thank you so much. And Radium, hello. Radium looks at her PhD, looks at an innovative theoretical framework and approach to sustainability and heritage with a focus on built heritage in China. I think she's just about to finish her PhD in terms of her viva, so she's really looking forward to that. She's initially trained as a building archaeologist and have practiced as a heritage conservation planner. Her experience and expertise stand in interdisciplinary crossroads of architecture, archaeology, urban planning, and heritage studies. She is also a team member of EU Commission project Luang Prabang, Handle with Care, implemented by German National Development Agency, GIZ, which aim to improve sustainability of the tourism industry in Luang Prabang. She has collaborated with public and private sectors, NGOs, and local communities across Asia and Europe. Her publications and research interests cover a wide range of topics from architectural history to heritage tourism, to historic urban landscape, adaptive reuse of historic buildings, with a focus on China and Southeast Asia. She has a 4 years experience in undergraduate and postgraduate teaching at WSA, and currently she is a co-unit lead along with Sade, who was our earlier presenter in MA Architectural Design at WSA. She's also an English editor and translator for academic journals Heritage Architecture and Built Heritage, and social media editor for Planning Perspectives Journal. She also has experience in photography, illustration, filmmaking, specialist tour guiding with a heritage focus. With this broad range of experience, today she is going to present a talk titled A Theater of Complexity, a relational and dynamic framework for heritage and sustainability. So over to you, Radium.
Thanks, Hira. I wasn't expecting to have such a full introduction. It got a bit embarrassing. Let me share my screen. Hang on a second. Here we are. Do we see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me and for being here. So since the focus of this year's exhibition is about process and method, I want to introduce the theoretical framework and a relevant set of methods that I established in my PhD for heritage and sustainability. But along the way, I will also provide some context and outline the primary research outcomes. So hopefully it won't be entirely boring. I will start with a brief summary of what I try to do with my PhD. So my PhD aims to establish an interdisciplinary integration of heritage and sustainability. It investigates how these two concepts may be understood under a coherent framework, how they are debated in academic and public discourse, and how they are practiced in complex contexts such as China. One of the research objectives is to bridge the gap between theoretical reflections and practice in the heritage field. This initiative emerges in response to the disconnections between the recent critical turn of heritage studies and heritage practice. One of these disconnections lies in the challenges of translating these sort of academic critiques and critical approaches into applicable methods to inform heritage practices, policies, strategies, and decision-making. So my research concerns a reconceptualization of heritage and sustainability through theoretical exploration and empirical studies, and developing research and practical methods to tackle these disconnections. Oh, sorry, hang on. And another initiative comes from the ubiquity of the two concepts, which is heritage and sustainability, which seem like they can mean anything these days, and their connection with a sense of crisis. The research interrogates and articulates some assumptions. For example, heritage must contribute to sustainable development, or heritage conservation inherently makes the world more sustainable. So I look at how these assumptions, whether these assumptions can be validated and in what conditions they can be true. And the focus on China's heritage management partly comes from my passion and my previous professional experience in China. But more importantly, it is a deliberate choice to achieve another objective of my PhD research, which is to establish a critical account of the complexity of China's heritage practices. The empirical studies are selected to present these sort of complexities with data to challenge a perceived notion of the Eastern approach. So my initiative for this PhD research can be traced back to 2013, when I was working on the conservation management plan of this particular little tiny temple, which is also the first case study of my PhD. And this was also what I had in mind when I envisaged my PhD proposal. During my work on this project and also all the subsequent years following what has happened to this place, I've reflected on the broader definition of heritage, what it is and what it does, the work that we do as heritage professionals, what it means for the place, its communities and broader society, and how such efforts can be more sustainable and meaningful. These questions are still relevant to this day for China's heritage management, but also involve further reflections of them in broader contexts. One of such critical reflections lie in the perception of Chinese and, for that matter, non-Western heritage in Anglophone literature. The complexities revealed in these, even these tiny rural temples, call for closer attention to the topics related to the global and local in heritage studies. So here it's perhaps useful to just highlight the research questions that my PhD tried to tackle. So from the literature review of my research in these core subject areas, I could see some common challenges and research opportunities in both subject fields. So including seeking for a theoretical framework that can capture the complex, multi-deterministic and interdisciplinary nature of both these concepts, heritage and sustainability, and identifying the fundamental mechanisms and conditions for the unsustainable or sustainable outcome in heritage management, and also transforming that theoretical framework into an operable, applicable approach that can guide decision-making in heritage practices. One of the crucial moments in my research came as I started to search for this kind of theoretical framework that can encompass the sort of characteristics of these concepts. So some of the most inspiring encounters included systems thinking, relational ontology, which is related to the dialogical model of heritage proposed by Rodney Harrison, and last but not least, critical realism. The last tradition, critical realism, is also where I encountered the two crucial concepts in my PhD, morphogenesis and morphostasis. So morphogenesis is basically the process of change, and morphostasis is a process of sustaining something. Doesn't necessarily mean it's static, but keeping something, upholding something, sustaining it. So the position adopted by this thesis also counters a kind of anthropocentric view of heritage, meaning the most important thing in heritage research and practice is the humans. So I counter that by incorporating assemblage theory and actor network theory, recognizing non-human actors, for example, buildings, physical space, environment, and their agents and their agency or causal powers. So this position is coherent with the latest post-discursive turn of heritage studies. So they consider humans and non-humans are equally crucial and interacting components of heritage as assemblages. So building upon the two concepts of morphogenesis and morphostasis, I suggest the possibility of viewing sustainability in relational terms as enduring relations between actors. So by referring sustainability to a morphostatic state of relations, so a sustained state of relations, it describes the possible relations and interactions between change and continuity within sustainability. It emphasizes that changes are possible within a certain range, with this relation still being sustained, while also pointing out that a new type of sustainable relation is possible even after the previous relation is interrupted or becomes obsolete by the disruptive changes. So this theoretical framework, and particularly actor network theory's advocacy for chasing the associations, informs the choice of research methods. So overall, the empirical studies adopt the case study research methodology and the single embedded case model, where a case study region and some units of analysis within that region are studied in depth. So explanation building, time series analysis, and cross-case synthesis, these are steps suggested within that very established methodology. But the specific methods for analysis, such as the cycles diagram, so morphogenesis, morphostatic cycles diagram, and the morphostatic timeline were established specifically within this thesis, this PhD, to understand how this relational model of sustainability can be understood in the context of heritage management. So the case study region is in the south and southeast part of Shanxi province in China, where a high concentration of pre-14th century surviving timber structures are located. The discovery of some of the country's oldest surviving timber structures in this region has played a significant role in the establishment of China's heritage conservation and management system. It was the only reason why state-led efforts and resources were pulled into this region to rescue these tiny little rural temples. This was also the context in which I encountered this region in my previous practice. The case study region in China is chosen upon the completion of a decade-long national scheme called the Southern Project, which is the most widespread and heavily invested top-down scheme regarding the restoration of historic timber buildings in this area. This specific space and time mark the reference point where the empirical case studies are situated. So all the selected cases have gone through that restoration within this project, and all the interventions or non-interventions that happen afterwards were also very much related to the context of this project. So it makes it a bit more feasible for us to discuss the sort of management and sustainable futures of these sites. I call them sites here, but really what I try to look at is what constitute the heritage assemblages in these cases and how they have evolved. So the three specific cases or units of analysis are chosen based on the presence of controversies and the accessibility of data as the primary criteria. The three cases are selected to help answer the research questions, particularly identifying the generative mechanisms giving rise to the sustainable or unsustainable outcomes in the case study region. So several combinations of conditions are considered across these cases. First, the three cases present three scenarios regarding the post-restoration interventions, one with a high profile and heavily invested intervention, which is the second case here, one with a small scale and grassroots interventions, which is the third case here, and one with nearly no post-restoration intervention or any prospect of it whatsoever, which is the first case. These three scenarios cover most of the situations within that case study region. And second, these three scenarios lead to the various degrees of presence of local and external human actors. A prominent presence of external actors can be observed in the second case, and the active engagement of local actors is apparent in the third case. And in the first case presents a kind of lack of capacity or presence from any prominent actor. And the third aspect, the cases present three tendencies regarding their future. So the first one and the second one both present challenges in facilitating their sustainable future at the moment or at the time of my research. And in contrast, the third case illustrates a promising condition that is rarely observed. That's the only case I've seen really in that case study region. So, so the diachronic examination, meaning the sort of not a kind of chronological timeline, but kind of looking at how all of these things evolve altogether, how they interact with each other. So it demonstrates that the heritage assemblages, well, the sustainability relies on the continuous contribution of causal powers that these change do not exceed the range of their resilience. It also shows that the longer these associations are sustained, the more potential they hold to exercise causal powers on other associations. For the case study examined in my PhD, three types of association appear to be the most prominent in forming and sustaining these assemblages. The first one is the religious one, because they're all temples. And then the second one is a socialist one, which it comes from a very specific period of their history. And then the third one is the heritage association, which comes from when they became, listed designated heritage sites. So for the case study region, the state or provincial level policies, the religious faith or the local communities, the local initiative and capacity exercise crucial causal powers for sustaining the religious and heritage associations. Whereas the socialist associations, because that period has gone now, although it is still sustained between individual community members and the sites through their memories or their social relations, but it faces the risk of obsolescence as memories fade and the physical traces from this period get wiped out by recent restorations. But there remains potential for new associations to emerge through new government policies and more private sector involvement. However, the second case study, which is an adaptive reuse case study, very high profile, a lot of investment, and it is held as a positive case by the administrations, it actually needs to be considered a lesson learned rather than a desirable outcome, because it appears that it actually experiences a lot of challenges in its sustainable future, because one of the associations becomes too prominent, suffocating all the other associations with the communities and all that. Also looking at the kind of chronological examination of these associations help predict the tendencies of sustainable futures for these cases. So the analysis of the three cases suggests that when an assemblage is dominated by one association, like I said, that second case study, the change of causal powers for that association can cause an abrupt impact on the entire assemblage. It also indicates that an assemblage is with more sustained and coexisting reinforcing associations present more resilience to change. So it is more sustainable than the one with fewer associations or than the one with a very dominant association, suffocating all the others. So this indication is quite valuable because it is not just limited to the case study region, but can have broader relevance beyond the scale and typology of the cases looked at in my PhD. So to conclude, my PhD sort of tried to demonstrate this original contribution to knowledge in three aspects. So the first one is using this theoretical framework to conceptualize heritage and sustainability's relational, multideterministic, and dynamic nature. And second, a more holistic understanding of the case studies is obtained by implementing this framework, but also that data also kind of feed back to the theoretical understanding. And the third is this framework is sort of developed into this versatile set of methods that can be applied in practice to understand, assess, and facilitate sustainable heritage management. As I said earlier at the beginning, one of the objectives of my PhD is to bridge the gap between the theoretical and critical reflections in academic research and the genuine concerns that heritage practitioners and other actors have on the ground. So this gap partially lies in the lack of deep theoretical exploration from practitioners and the lack of consideration to translate the critical reflections into practical solutions for academics. So that, for me, dissecting and unpacking the philosophical positions underpinning our understanding of heritage is very necessary to start from for my PhD, but also at the same time, the grounded data plays an equally significant role in informing and adjusting the theoretical findings. So this is all a process and it continues going beyond even my PhD. Thank you.
Thank you, Radium, for that fascinating walkthrough through your thesis, which seems you have been grappling with lots of data, interesting, but lots to process. If anybody has any questions, they can send us through the Q&A chat, Q&A function, not the chat. But meanwhile, Radium, you alluded to the question I was thinking in the last few sentences, and maybe you can expand further as to what do you see are the implications of your work on the practice, and given that you have all this practitioner experience, how do you plan to operationalize all this? I mean, are you thinking of any projects that you have lined up?
Well, I haven't got anything lined up. I wish I do, but yeah, I do. You know, that is actually something I didn't have time to include that. But one of the things, for example, is so in heritage practice at the moment, the most prevalent approach is this value-based approach, right? Everyone knows you kind of identify the value of heritage and all that, but it's a problem because values are very subjective, and everyone have their different values. So this approach is, instead of identifying the values, we identify the connections between heritage and all the other actors, like the buildings and other actors, and all the environmental elements as well. So this is a non-judgmental approach, if you may say. So in practice, I would imagine, especially for dealing with projects that perhaps involve some difficult heritage as well, this is very useful, because even if you have someone who has a negative connection with that heritage and they don't approve of this thing at all, but they are still relevant because they have a relationship with this place. So in a sense, in our decision making as practitioners, meaning you have to invite them to the table. You can't ignore them just because they don't agree with you. And even for interventions that might change this heritage in a way that should conventionally consider not good, like say reconstructing the whole thing or taking it down and building something new. We need to be open-minded about these things, because if this intervention can foster more association between this heritage site with broader communities and broader society, then maybe there's value to it. So it is, I'm trying to perhaps change this pre-moralized approach to heritage by introducing this framework.
That connects very well with our first question today from Lucas, which says, what parameters and factors would you change and manipulate in order to understand the heritage of a radically different context?
Oh gosh, that's a very difficult question, but I hope what I just said kind of answer that question, because I mean, to start with, we just cannot assume anything. You just have to go to the case and you talk to the people and you try to understand who are the actors, what are their relations, but also how have their relation changed over time through history and to now, and what, if any kind of decision making, we need to look at how that intervention will change all these relations. So in a sense, you're constantly checking your parameters and factors, so you don't actually have a set of things to look at right away. So you need to look at case by case. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Radium.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. I will now invite Dr. Shibu Raman to present. Shibu is a lecturer in architecture and urbanism at WSA. He's an architect and urban designer trained in the UK and India. He has over 25 years experience in the field of architecture and urban design, from which he has several completed projects, both in India and the UK. His research and teaching interests are in the area of urbanism, sustainable development, spatial network analysis, and urban transformations. Raman's lecture today focuses on Global South and urban development, challenges and opportunities to achieve a livable city. This aligns with the organization that he founded, CityForm, which investigates the relationship between sustainable and urban. So over to Shibu for his talk, Livable Urbanism.
Hi, I'll have to, I don't know what you can see. What can you see?
We can see maybe
a
it's
blank
a
screen
desktop with very bright colors.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Right. So what I'm presenting today is a work that started a long time back. The thoughts of these started in 2007, 2006, by around the time that we finished a major EPSRC funded project on sustainable urban form. So first of all, thank you to all the organizers for the opportunity to speak today. I'm really excited to share this research on this occasion. I'll start by giving a little bit of background about why are we looking at Global South and why is it important to all of us. Cities, as many of you know, is home for more than 55% of the global population, but only occupies about 2% of the global landmass. Therefore, cities are both a good solution for ever expanding global population and to preserve the natural landmass and biodiversity. However, cities consume more than 75% of global resources and contribute more than 75% of global emission. Therefore, cities need to be doing more to fight climate change, to avoid even more severe economic, ecological, and social emergencies. Well, World Bank and many others think that cities are the engines of global economy. And if you look at this map, the predicted urban expansion in the world, you can see that urban areas in China, India, Africa, and South America will be expanding exponentially in the coming few decades. If you focus your eyes on the light blue color, you'll see those light blue colors are expanding in those regions significantly in the period leading up to 2030. As a result, it is expected that these areas will be consuming more, polluting even more, resulting in more environmental disasters. This map clearly illustrates the need for focusing on Global South and why that is important for all of us and not for people in Global South. The third point I want to make about why we're focusing on Global South is about the planning system, which exists in rapidly growing regions. Planning as a profession developed in the period after the Industrial Revolution to address the rapid growth of urban population, mass migration from rural to urban, rapid urbanization of cities. With these, the planning aim to address the plight of working class with a cleaner cities, which has got better sanitation, transport system, etc. But it is rather outdated, as the context of urbanization is significantly different from those that they were tackling at the turn of last century. Post-industrial planning often looked at issues in the cities in silos. They looked at congestion as a road widening scheme, and so on and so forth. Cities are in fact a very dynamic system where everything is connected to everything else, directly or indirectly. Outdated statistical model used in planning is unable to understand and respond to these complex relationships. Cities are one of the most complex things that human beings have ever created, with many intertwined subsystems such as the environmental, social, economic, governance subsystems, which all interact with each other in complex ways and within the spatial subsystem of the city. Therefore, the physical quality of the city has got a significant impact on the quality of life, well-being of people, the environment, and the ecosystem within the city. So this, like I said, was a long-term research that started in 2007 and has evolved through various engagement and appointments, such as my involvement in the Smart City mission of Mangalore in 2017, and then from there onwards, various other cities in India. So why we're looking at India is that India has got one of the largest urban population expansion in recent decades. It's alone, like last 20 years alone. The number of cities in India has grown from 5,000 to 10,000. Many of these cities have grown from small settlement to large towns and cities. However, many unsustainable practices of low density suburbanization is creating new challenges in cities in terms of transportation, equitable service provision, which are often creating unsustainable ecological imbalances. So to give you a gist of what it manifests as, or one of the manifestations of this urban expansion is what you can see here as example of 4 metro cities in India. And you can see like how the cities have grown into the green field and to the suburbs significantly in recent time. So this is examples from Delhi, Mumbai, and Chennai. With the current practices of planning, there's a lack of understanding of this complex relationship within the city. and lack of understanding of this results in many Indian cities becoming a place of disparity, a social, economic, and environmental injustices, often lacking in fundamental, fundamental elements of decent quality of life, providing equal opportunity for social mobility and respect for nature. Part of the issue is also a lack of scientific research in many regions of the world where the rapid urbanization is happening. So I'll try to outline some of the issues that we faced during our studies in India. So many of the planning in India or in many other parts where the cities are growing rapidly is a reactive planning, where they are clearly reacting to the current scenarios. There's a lack of political will to act and develop proactive vision for the city. There is a lack of funding to be able to develop research and evidence to develop such a vision. And more importantly, there's a lack of data, as a certain amount of data hogging, as well as data hoarding, as well as different departments keeping data in silos without any ability to kind of look at it across different sectors and scales. There's a lack of transparency in these things, which results in ability to be able to analyze the city in a more comprehensive way. So for our research, we started developing an understanding of these complex relationships within the city through looking at all the theories and existing research, identifying those relationships that we are interested in and how they kind of interact with each other. We'll come back to this diagram later. Going to specific cities that we are studying, we often go into the city with a good understanding of what is known about the city in terms of its physical expansion, its population growth, its density, life expectancy, all the social, economic, environmental indicators that is available from existing macro scale research, which is then followed up with detailed archival research, looking at the historic and cultural transformation of these cities. And then also, then we go into the city with our own innovative and smart tools in documenting, measuring, and modeling the complex relationships within the city. So we use things like drone surveys and 3D scanners and mobile-based social survey questionnaires and so on and so forth. So this is an example of like in a way you go in to document the morphological condition. We use either drones or 3D scanner to kind of really document the morphology in a lot of detail, which obviously is complemented by extensive social and environmental surveys and mapping of the city with the physical surveys of the city. And these were collated into extensive data sets, which were then analyzed to come up with some of the conclusions. So I talked about the lack of data, lack of especially the map data. So we had to often start with actually generating our own GIS map, which either do not exist or is not available in the format or in the shape in which we would like to have those maps. So we started generating those maps and then using that map as well as other secondary source of data as well as our mapped indicators. We started generating more clever maps of the city, such as the land use patterns, the noise map, the energy map, often using algorithms to predict what would be the energy use or the noise level in the city. Obviously, which a physical map and availability of the map then allow us to do all sorts of other modeling and mapping that was not possible previously in these cities. We also then collaborated with external partners such as Strathclyde University in using our basic map in generating automated morphological mapping of the city, identifying unique morphological conditions within the city using a very sophisticated algorithm. We've written a couple of papers on this. One of it is referenced there, which again feed back into the research about how the built environment is affecting qualities of life in those cities. So there are many findings from this research, but I just want to focus on one thing about one of the city that we studied. So the city Kochi, which is in the south of India, which we've been studying for the last 3 years. We've been looking at this issue of edge expansion. So these are based on our maps using a modeling technique where we identified a particular way of identifying the hotspots of where the urban expansion and growth is happening, whether that is infill growth or expansion outwards. We started identifying really pressure points within the city where there is extreme development pressures within the city. If you look at a much broader picture of that region, you'll see that from 1870 onwards, where we got this map, you'd see how those expansion has gone into the floodplain. So the background bigger map that you see is the floodplains. And if you could try to overlap those or juxtapose those with each other, you begin to see that the city is expanding into ecologically more sensitive areas such as floodplains and greenfield. And zooming into it, you begin to see how those inner city areas where there's growth pressures or the edge conditions near the ring road is actually in the more vulnerable parts of the city. We then identify and unpack all the complex relationship that it causes, such as in floods situation, as many of the edge expansion resulted in the city getting more frequent floods, and how that affects in short and long term, both in terms of infrastructure damages and health conditions or service provision, as well as economic conditions of the city. Obviously, sorry.
2 minutes over the presentation.
I'm really struggling with my throat.
Yeah, I can see. I'm really sorry. Yeah.
Just recovering from COVID, so unfortunately I can't speak any faster. So just focusing on this kind of urban expansion that results in rise in vehicular number, the increase in the spread of the city means the ability for people to walk from work to live place become longer, and therefore increase in vehicular use, which then results in higher pollution, sedentary lifestyle, and so on and so forth. So these complex relationship is well documented through our research. Here, for example, how the rise in obesity and diabetes has been documented, and how that is correlating significantly with the expansion of the city. Again, another clear mapping of that relationship, where the emission air quality index, as well as the increase in distance between live and work, has resulted in a sedentary lifestyle and the rise in cardiovascular illnesses. So going back to this kind of complex relationship, you'll see that the layout has got a significant impact on urban form land use, and that results in transport infrastructure, physical accessibility, lifestyle, sense of safety and security, social behavior, health, pollution, which indirectly affect ecology, economy, and so on and so forth. We also looked at many other aspects, such as waste management, the kind of pollution of water, water resources around the city, and the expansion of water hyacinth, which is a invasive species, and how a city that is surrounded by water is struggling for potable water in certain regions of the city, and how that overlaps with the deprived community, and so on and so forth. So again, everything begin to kind of have a lot more complex relationship, like livelihood, the polluted water affects fish stock, which then affect livelihood, and so on and so forth. Obviously, this is a research that is also directly connected with the studio. So individual students would be looking at a lot more detail into a particular phenomena here. For example, looking at a particular green space and how its evaporative index is being modeled through NASA satellite data, using that to kind of predict what would happen in terms of biodiversity in this area and to the whole city if that green space get destroyed in the process of urban development. Again, this modeling and its kind of proposal has been presented in a conference paper and also published as a book chapter later. This is an example of how the urban water issue has been tackled in a previous design thesis in a MARC program. And another example of how the densification issue can be identified through understanding the existing policies and land ownership patterns, and creating a framework for densification to allow more active models of travel and reduce the kind of use of private vehicular usage. Many of these work is presented in a virtual exhibition, which you can access through the QR code on the right-hand side, as well as the link there. And you'll see a lot more details of the research, as well as some of the proposals that we've developed in the last 3 years. I think I'll stop there and let you guys ask some questions while I take some rest.
Thank you, Shibu. I really appreciate that you're being here with us today, although you're still recovering COVID. Thank you so much. It was really an interesting and interactive presentation, lots and lots of information. And I have a question from Benjamin. Your research makes significant use of technology to aid the scale and speed of process. Do you see a point where these large research teams are replaced by small teams of computer scientists?
I think that, look, every member of the team, as diverse they are, the better it is. And it is about actually developing a lot of network and connection. And so some of the work that we do is done within WSA and within Cardiff University. Some of it goes out to our partners, developing their own findings, which then feed back into this livable urbanism research. So I don't see the team reducing in size, but expanding with a diverse range of discipline coming in to explore this complexity and the relationship within the city. One of the difficulty is the funding. Like I said, who's going to fund such an ambitious program with no clear kind of endpoint as it is required for either a governmental funding or a development funding, which makes it, like, really interesting in exploring how to kind of pursue such a research and come up with a new way of approaching cities. The idea is to develop something which is trying to kind of understand that complexity and also focus on what I'd like to kind of say that, a livable city, which is pretty much the kind of aim of this research project. Like, really understand, like, what ways does the physical and social fabric of the city affect various aspects of livability within the city. So I'd see this team expanding.
Thank you so much, Shibu. I'm afraid now it's the time for the break. I would like to thank all of our speakers so far and all of our attendees, and we will be back again with the rest of the speakers at 6. So thank you all, and see you in 5 minutes.
So hello again to everyone. So I'm going to share I'm going to host the session for this hour from 6 to 7, and I'm going to introduce the next speaker, Simon Lannon, my colleague Simon Lannon, Senior Research Fellow at the WSA with an interest in measurement and modeling of the built environment. So Simon, I think that your presentation would be called Bangers, Barbecue and Air Quality, isn't it? So all yours.
Can you hear me? And can you see
yes.
the screen?
Yes, working very well. Thank you.
Okay. So I think that we're going to change scale, maybe change gear as well. And I want to talk about sort of the science of air quality, but I think there's a context here that how we fit that into sort of the School of Architecture. And I want to bring forward some of the sort of ideas about the work that we've been doing in the school over the many years, but also just thinking about how we develop that sort of understanding of air quality through the lens of very cheap citizen science, you might say. So, right. Air quality, I think maybe we should think about it again. You know, what does it mean to us? It's an interesting thing, air. We can't see it. I mean, sometimes you can. If you can see the air, then we really know the air quality is very poor. But basically, we can't see air. It's invisible to us. It's very difficult to interact with. But we have lots of really good ways of thinking about it. We're taught this through our university courses about how air moves, how we move air around, how we can do that passively or actively by systems, how we can change the quality of the air and deliver it for thermal comfort and for comfort throughout the building. So there's a sort of a sense that air quality is quite well known, but actually it's really difficult to see. So I want to talk about air quality as well, about the pollutants. So what is there stuff in there? You know, air isn't pure, it's got stuff in it. And so this is sort of there's two diagrams. Basically, the stuff on the left-hand side, this is talking about what's known as particulate matter. This is stuff that floats around. It's actually quite big. It's not a sort of a gas. It sits in a sort of in a sense that it's actually a material that maybe can cause harm. So this particulates, there's these scales of particulates, and we talk about PM as particulate matter. There's 2.5, and that's quite small. Then we also have PM10, and these are two regularly measured levels of particulates. On the right-hand side, we start to see some of the sort of the scale of it as well in terms of size. So there's micrometers. Not going to test you on how big these are, but basically we talk about gas. The gas is very, very, very small, and then we move up through stuff that we can perhaps can't see. So things like viruses, we can't see those, and allergens, but also we can start to see some stuff around the visible area. So one of the things that's really interesting is we can see some dust already through reflection. We don't see it directly. So if you have a shaft of light, you'll see the dust in it, but you can't see the dust directly. And then we have the visible stuff that we can actually see. So that's smoke or heavy dust. What's happening out there? Air quality, it's moving around in terms of its performance. In the UK particularly, we've been doing quite well. It's been dropping down. So this is measurements of these two particulate levels, and the trends, roadside and urban, are declining in terms of the level of particulate levels. So on the left right-hand one, we look at particulate levels. Anything above 50 is considered dangerous. Now, this data is available freely to us throughout the country, and it has a really good sense of where we're going in terms of the background. So how does this work in terms of what we want to do? This is thinking about Cardiff, the thing about the place where near I live. This is sort of the data we can get from our local network, and it's free to download. And this sort of allows us to think about how things are going on and what's happening. And what's interesting in here is you have these very reliable sensors. You know, the trend's pretty low, below 20, which is not problematic. And then every now and again, we get these spikes. Now, spikes can happen for many reasons outside, and that's something we need to be careful of when we're measuring our particulates particularly. So I'm going to move into the house. So this is my house. I'm sitting in the ground floor next to in the front of the house. The rest of the family are scattered around the house at the moment, all generating particulates and gases. And what I did for sometime last year in July, I decided I would just see what happened in the house over 6 days. So these are sort of spots to put it in. It's a traditional sort of 1930s home. We've had a loft conversion, architect designed loft conversion put on top. So we had some sensors throughout the building, and I wanted to show you what happened. So bearing in mind, outside was around 8 micrograms per meters cubed. And this is what happened over those days. Now it's a bit of a scatter, there's a bit of a trend going on here. And what's really fascinating is that we can break this up into sort of different spikes. So anything above 50 is a problem. So we know this, we have from problem areas, and then I can kind of explain what's going on. So what we have the first one is this purple band, looking from left and right, is deodorant. Now these deodorant spikes happen throughout the time. We also have some cooking events, and these are events where we've been cooking, and that comes back to this idea of bangers, sausage, frying, cooking is problematic. But also there's this interesting thing that spike I showed you earlier on, this red one, the outside. And what's fascinating about this is for us is that you have these, in the house, there are basically 3 levels. So there's this level at the bottom, and that's the second floor, which is the modern one upstairs. And that is basically resilient to the outside. It's well sealed, it's not getting any outside air. The second level here, and this is then the ground floor and the kitchen, so it's down here. There is a spike and the outside is driving that up. Now the last one, the levels up here, is in the first floor. And that's our bedroom, and that's where we have a window open. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing the outside air is quite polluted, and the inside air of the building is responding to that. Final one is we clean every now and again as well, so that the green one at the end. So thinking about one of those cooking events, what happens when we cook? Well, the blue one, this big spike, that's actually in the kitchen. But what you see is that, and again, the 50 level, problematic. We see this, the rest of the house follows up. It follows the trend. So we get this big spike and the rest of the house follows. We also get a deodorant event as well. Okay, so there's really interesting things around the whole house is polluted. So even though we have the sources down here, it will travel to all of the house. And we don't have fan system, we don't have air's not being moved around, it will just percolate around the house. And I suppose if you think about somebody in your home, if anybody burns some toast, you can smell it pretty quickly. So the idea that the actual pollutants travel around very fast is quite important. So coming on to barbecues. Now, I talk about this 50 level barbecues. You'd think this is an outside reading, but actually the barbecue is outside the back of the house, the red dot outside, and the sensor was inside at the front of the house. So that has basically percolated through the house when I had that barbecue, and it got to very high levels in the home. So basically anything up here for about probably around nearly 2 hours, my house was at levels which would be considered dangerous. Now, was it a problem? You know, did my health deteriorate? I'm not sure, but it happened for quite a long time. The great thing with these sensors, and I'm going to come on to what they're like. I've got one here in my hand, little sensor here. The great thing about them is they're portable. You can take them with you. So this is a working day. It's not really a working day. The sensor only ran until 4:30 when I got home. It was during sort of the periods when we weren't necessarily coming into work. And what you see is some trends again. So what's happened? What fascinated me, again, that level, the 50 level, that's the level we will need to worry about, is the first section, but on the bike. So the sensor is outside with me cycling along in Cardiff. The level was very, very low, probably background, very low levels. And then we did some work in the office buildings. We had a little peak here, and that was maybe when I was moving some equipment around. And then finally, next thing is I was doing some work in the basement, and there was this really very strong smell, and there was a solvent smell. That spike at this level, that's dangerous. So something was happening there. So quickly I left, got on my bike, and then went to a cafe. And what you see here are these three trends. And these are when somebody cooked some bangers or sausages in that cafe. So I wasn't in the kitchen, I was in the cafe, but somebody was cooking in the building, and there you get these three spikes of extra levels. So it was quite interesting. It was quite a long lunch time, but I was actually doing that for science. I wasn't doing it for any other particular reason apart from that, obviously. Another thing that happens in the UK is that we have a celebration, an event every November, and we call Bonfire Night. And this shows the levels outside, again, going above 50. And I had all my doors shut and everything else shut. And you can see that the inside my house, it picked up. And then when everybody stopped celebrating or stopped setting fireworks off, we have this decay down of the levels down to the background level. And I think this is quite shocking to think that even in your home, you can have that amount of pickup from outside. So why is this important in terms of the sort of citizen science? Citizen science is something that we can use to develop evidence. And in architecture, we kind of try to use science to help us to make decisions around where we build buildings, where we ask people to go, where we try and make people safe. And one of the ways you can collect data is to ask the citizens, the people, the clients, the people who are actually going to be in those spaces. So this is this first demonstration of what the equipment can do. Now, this is quite an interesting thing. It shows you spikes, and I can identify those. I've noted those. But actually, the most interesting thing about this is that what's really important is not necessarily the actual spikes. It's the bits in between. They make citizen science work. It's when nothing much is happening, no particular events, and all the sensors are together. So in this area, we have sensors not similar, but in these areas, we have the sensors are very similar in their behavior. Now that gives us confidence that they're actually behaving correctly. And very, very important with citizen science, that you have equipment that is delivering sensible and understandable results. And this is where I've been working with the Welsh Institute of Social and Economic Research and Data, that's WSA, they're based in Cardiff University, and they've been looking at an incinerator in Barry in South Wales. And the incinerator is very close to the town centre, and the local residents were particularly worried. So Nick Hacking, who worked in the School of Architecture some years ago, he was helping out sort of the citizens, giving them information, giving them ways of taking the data, and also sort of explaining to them the value of that data. And now, one of the things I was helping them with is this idea that if you can get back to the same levels, it's really important, being sensible about how you record things. And this allowed them to develop information and a process that allows them to interact with the authorities, because the authorities will deal with scientists, but they're not very happy dealing with citizens. So this is a very powerful part of what we do. So another in the UK, we use another term for bangers. Bangers are sausages, or they also for old cars. Now, I'm ashamed to say I have an old car. It's great for embodied carbon. It means that it's been quite sustainable, but unfortunately, it's starting to wear out, and its performance is no longer necessarily adequate for sensible use. So I was taking the car to be serviced, and you have these two journeys on the way in and the way out. And what surprised me is that the outside level was around 5. So this is 5 here, and so the mapping that I was doing, the level should be in the car should be below that, and for a lot of the time it is. But every now and again we have sort of particular instances. Now this is a rural environment, so I wouldn't expect any pollution points, and on the way in with the window closed, there was quite a lot of pollution. So what was happening here is my car was making some pollution and I was inhaling it. So using a car, it's normally, sometimes it's fine, but other times when it's working hard or it's stationary, so this is where if there's elevation change or increased traffic, you can see sort of issues there. So one of the things that I thought would be quite useful is to think about what would happen if I was to purchase an electric car. And my colleague Vicky Stevenson, she was very happy to help out with this. So she basically allowed me to put a sensor. She took a sensor with her and put it in her car, and she drove along. And you can see that it basically, the particulates within the car were 8, which is actually lower than the average background. So the car has actually got filters in it. It's not pollution. It's not creating any combustion products. It's actually quite a safe way of working. So there's an interesting thing around why the choices you can make and one of the benefits. Now there's a lot of controversy around electric cars. They're not pollution free. The tires and brakes and also other systems will actually create pollutions and particulates. So we do need to be careful, and reducing the amount of travel is obviously important. But significantly, this is significantly better than my existing car. So I just want to wrap up there really and sort of say there's the things that we really we found from this, and kind of closing thoughts. Air is really hard to see, and I know it sounds stupid to say that, but it really is very difficult. It's very complicated. There's some fascinating sort of work around slurring effects, which are a way of visualizing air, like the mirage you might see, so that we can actually see air movement. And particularly since COVID, there's been a lot of work around that, trying to work out where air moves around in the building. What's actually changed since I started? When I started, if I was to buy this piece of kit that you see in front of you, it would probably cost me around £20,000. So now this is very cheap and very reasonable. The sensor itself is this thing, and that's that you can buy them in their thousands from Alibaba. This sensor here, this is the actual Raspberry Pi, and obviously this is a battery pack. So all commercially available, all freely available, all the software is available. You can download all the software you want for that to make it work. So what can we do? Obviously viruses are very small and they're difficult to track. One of the things we've been told to keep windows open. It's great, it really works. It's a fantastic thing to do, but unless it's cold or noisy outside. Air quality is directly related to events in or outside the building. And also, I just want to reiterate, frying sausages is dangerous. It's quite tasty, but perhaps we shouldn't do it. And again, reflecting on the costs, total for £100, which is obviously quite expensive, but in terms of the value you can get out of it, it's quite reasonable value. I'm going to wrap up there.
Thank you very much, Simon. Is there? I just commented here on the chat. I will be taking up questions for Simon. They're on the chat. Probably there could be live questions, but as well as we have just 2 minutes left now for the scale, maybe it would be better on the chat directly. Maybe anyone? Oh, yeah. Any questions so far? Otherwise, I have mine prepared. Obviously, Simon, one on my end. So, yeah, okay. So my question was related. So I'm just trying to bring your feeling to mind somehow. So how this way of using these kits could be applied as well to the design or the redesign of public spaces. So how that could be somehow informing ways that designers we could reconsider the ventilation and the spatial arrangement of public spaces somehow, if there's any.
I think that it sort of would highlight, I think one of the great things is if you use this in conjunction with good surveying. So if you sort of talk to the people in the spaces, understand what's happening within those spaces, sort of, I think particularly around traffic. I haven't shown you my other piece of kit, which is this nitrous oxide sort of sensor that is really, amazing thing. And those sorts of, the nitrous oxide is really important. So there's some, if you can relate the readings you've taken with the people and also what's happening, they become incredibly powerful as a sort of a proof of case, a way of saying that we need to sort this out. It's about information, and we really need that information. We need to have that. And so it is, we can do some fantastic simulation, and have done in the past, use wind tunnels to work out where the air is going to flow. But those are very abstract and actually quite lacking in temporality. They are very, very stationary. Now, I know airflow isn't stationary, so I think this is a way of taking that temporal nature of it. And I think that's what's really powerful.
Directly from the user's perspective, exactly. That's very powerful. So that combination with surveys, with one-to-one surveys and one-to-one testing the air quality for the user's experience seems very, very powerful. So thank you very much, Simon. I've got one burning last-minute question from Faisal. Is filtering supply air for existing properties a solution?
Yeah. I mean, HEPA filters are fantastic. Bang them in if you can. But yeah, they work, and all the science is saying that. And also, if you can use it, particularly for viruses, ultraviolet is amazing. So there's some very technical solutions, but they don't sort of deal at a city urban scale, but they do at an individual. I don't suggest we wear sort of air masks or like that, but there's some stuff you can do.
Okay, thank you so much, Simon. Now we're handing over to our next presentation, which is Clarice Bleil de Souza, that I'm going to very briefly present, because you've got a very long bio here, Clarice. So just saying that she's a professor, Clarice Bleil de Souza, chair of design decision making at the Welsh School of Architecture, and teaching architecture technology, research methods, coordinating MSc dissertations, supervising PhD and MSc students. Let's leave it there. And now it's your turn for your presentation called Decision Making for Generative Design, Helping Future Generations to Meet UN Sustainable Goals. Thank you very much, Clarice.
Thank you, Shibu. I'll try to share my screen, see if it works here. I'm not sure. Let me just check. I'm sharing the.
I'm not Shibu, by the way, I'm Federico.
Can you, sorry, Federico, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yes,
okay,
perfectly
great,
right.
great.
Yeah.
You see the full slide presentation, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being here, and especially the exhibition team 2022 for organizing this talk on decision making for regenerative design, helping future generations to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I will skip more formal introductions because Federico already introduced me, and also me, most of you. So I just wanted to go straight to the presentation. And as you are already aware, the planet we are living in, or we are leaving to you and to the future generations, is not in great condition. And we have real challenges to address and a short amount of time to act if we are to preserve it to ourselves and to future generations. And I don't want to show you the numbers for this, because there is more than enough information about this in the media, in research, and where you can easily access to. What I really want to discuss is frameworks for solutions, because we are not scientists, we are designers, and as designers, we design and change the world. So, and this is why this is what I'm going to discuss with you today. So decision making for regenerative design, hopefully sparking some ideas about how future generations can meet UN Sustainable Development Goals. So let's first examine the challenges we have and then try to look at different ways to address them. Let's look at the common sense challenges. Let's say the grand challenges stated in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are an urgent call for action by all countries in global partnership to provide a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. So challenges which are not really fashion, but they do need a lot of thinking creatively and creativity and expertise more than anything else, but also a lot of thinking. And challenges that directly impact and are impacted by our built environment that can benefit from well-thought decision-making and need evidence, mainly evidence-based design, to prove the solutions that we propose actually address them effectively. So the first of these problems is the problem of living within planetary boundaries. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but basically, which does not include only reducing CO2 emissions, but urgently reducing the loss of biodiversity. So it means we have to know how much resources we have and really stick to it. So the idea of reducing, recycling, and reusing is beyond urgent now. It is not enough, and the technology alone will not solve our problems. It's not going to save us. We need to rebuild, we need to restore, we need to regenerate our environment, and we need wise decisions for this, and also creativity. Because time is overdue for us to transcend the boundaries of our environment and consider them inserted into bioregions around communities and neighborhoods. So we now have to think about our cities or our neighborhoods as cells of civil society and the place where the ecosystems are shared, so they function in a healthy way and in a reconciliation with nature. The second of the problems that we have to face is the one of building resilience, hopefully learning the lessons from several types of disasters and recovering from them, building back better. And this needs to be done effectively. That means using our knowledge and expertise in a creative way so we can promote transformative change towards more sustainable urban futures. And for this, we definitely need effective responses and above all, integrated responses, because we cannot afford a collage of solutions anymore. We as designers, we need to learn how to design solutions which are integrated into a coherent project and that are supported by robust evidence. And the third of the problems is the problems of reducing inequalities, which Shibu referred to before. And this is a difficult one for us designers because during our design study years, we tend to imagine utopian futures without consulting with people that are going to be living in them. And this is especially true in our formation years when our main client is our tutor, right? And we do not really understand what it means to design for the real world. And then we go to practice and we have clients most of the time, not all people occupying the building, but actually we are designing for those paying for the building to be done, for the building to be built, and then defining who is going to be using the building and how. And that leaves us again out of touch with those actually occupying our buildings in real life. Again, potentially designing utopian scenarios. So time is overdue for us to learn how to listen to our communities, how to work on close collaboration with them, so we can not only properly address their concerns, but also co-design with them, transcending our role as technicians towards real originality in producing sustainable cities and societies. Because without the contribution of communities, we are not going to change the world. But how do we achieve this? How can we be part of the solution rather than part of the pollution? How can we rethink our cities, our neighborhoods, and the way we live and properly align with main initiatives worldwide, such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are pursuing the agenda of creating sustainable cities and communities for all, when sustainability alone is not enough anymore? So what do? We have gone beyond the target of designing buildings which can reduce carbon emissions. We have to provide safe, healthy places for people to live and work in quicker, cheaper, and better than ever before, especially in emerging and fragile economies where progress is critical and where the biodiversity is in decline, and mitigation and adaptation to climate change and several types of disasters are mandatory. So how do we get there? What do we do? So we have no other option but to regenerate. We have to go beyond sustainability that preaches doing less harm. We have to change our mindset. It's time for us to provide something back. For example, to put energy back to the grid, to increase city drainage, potentially adopt circular economy, to change all these things so that we have to regenerate and produce design solutions that positively contribute to the ecosystem they are inserted in, restoring these environmental qualities of this ecosystem and context to its original condition and beyond. We have to reduce consumption of resources. We have to provide them through renewable sources. We have to recycle, reuse, and upscale resources at the end of their life and achieve user well-being and health. But you ask me how? So one example that we investigate collectively at the European level was the EU Cost Action Restore, which was rethinking sustainability towards a regenerative economy. So that was a large European network of professionals from different disciplines that did work together to propose some ideas, collect the best practice, produce training material, and also shared information about how to design regenerative futures. And as part of this action, we also had to develop training schools focused on design charrettes to train different types of designers to work with regenerative design. So the case you see in the slide here was actually one of the first of these training schools that we did in Malaga in October 2018, when a group of 25 international practitioners from very different countries had to work together towards this intensive collaboration in design, in a design competition, where the focus was to regenerate the neighborhood of La Luz in Malaga. And sorry, my slides are jumping ahead of me. And I was there as an observer, basically to collect information about how these people were collaborating and interacting with each other. And then I had to report back to the action on lessons learned and best practice. So from these observations, there were 4 important points that came out. Let's say 4 lessons to be learned. One was that the winner of the competition, the team, had a fully integrated design project and a reasonably sound method to achieve it. The second was that all teams intensively used different types of digital simulations and made decisions combining them in different ways. They had evidence to back up their decisions. The third lesson was that the winning project designed beyond buildings. They really saw buildings integrated into the neighborhood and the city. They enhanced drainage infrastructure, they restored greenery, and they promoted urban agriculture. And in addition, it designed affordances for people's daily routines in connection with the environment and the city. So what I sort of want to show you today in this presentation are examples, like 4 examples, simple examples that from the research that I do with colleagues, which directly relate to these 4 points. So you can hopefully understand them in a bit more detail with some illustrations, and perhaps take some lessons for your own designs. So the lesson 1, it is really difficult to do integrated design by only agreeing on targets and key performance indicators with the colleagues. We really need to have robust and systemic methods to coordinate design decisions from different disciplines. Because as design moves from the concept stage to the technical stage, common goals get transformed along the project into very specific technical goals. And then these goals many times are in conflict with each other. For example, a landscape designer who proposes a specific type of greenery to configure a quiet sitting area can well conflict with a wind expert who is, after some wind tests, proves the position of this greenery can increase wind speed to uncomfortable or even dangerous levels. So how do we reconcile these different types of technical decisions? Trial and error takes time, so we tend to adopt the view of the wind expert to avoid future liabilities. That's very likely that is the case that happens in practice. And we miss opportunities to find a solution which can actually work for both. So in this project, which was done in collaboration with a colleague in Russia at the time before the war, when the world was different, we discussed conflict management big time while designing for urban climate regeneration, and we transferred a method from product design to building design. We used a method called axiomatic design to control our decisions. It's a very common method used in product design to reconcile different disciplines. And we consider the wind as a common factor in different simulation models and greenery as a common solution to control wind pollution and promote well-being. We first established like a single acceptable range of wind speeds for all disciplines to work with, and containing limits to reduce concentration of pollutants, to avoid eye discomfort, prevent snow drifts, which was very important for the project, and also maintain outdoor thermal comfort. And we then direct designers to consult a database with density and permeability of different green belt configurations to attenuate wind speed and select initial best matches to be tested using simulations, and also tests in the wind tunnel in detailed design phase to then prove that this would work. So through this, we clearly record every step to quantify the problem and make sure the solution worked. Then the lesson 2, integrated design calls for robust workflows to record and transfer best practice in site and design assessment. And this is especially beneficial when you try to solve difficult design problems, such as the one of building back better after disaster. And in this case, we had to design temporary buildings to accommodate displaced populations before full regeneration is achieved. So this temporary stage needs a fast planning and design response with no time for detailed analysis and assessment. So in this project, which was done with colleagues here and also in the University of Pisa, we use Jupyter notebooks to develop a series of automated multidisciplinary workflows which connect different data sets and tools, and included mainly crowdsource and free open access web data, which reduced issues related to data accessibility. We also look at photogrammetry and 3D point clouds, facilitating data reach through remote surveys. Machine learning directly applied to spatial data to extract and classify configuration patterns, and then space syntax and environmental analysis tools to analyze indoor-outdoor relationships in parallel. So they are multi-temporal, and they look at how the city adapts to the different disaster phases from before the strike up to the recovery phase. And they are completely multi-scale, going beyond buildings up to the city and the region. So we embrace the digital revolution here to enable our problems to be better defined, and again, for our solutions to be properly tested. Lesson 3, workflows enable us to transfer information across different projects to analyze large quantities of data to produce guidelines for public authorities to develop and implement regenerative school buildings in Egypt. So in this project, which is a PhD student project here, which I help supervising, we look at schools in Egypt. So Egypt is a seismic country subject to regular mild earthquakes, and the government has developed 4 earthquake-proof building typologies for schools, which are widely used throughout the country. But there is no clear rationale to decide the best match between these building typologies and a given school site with regards to environmental conditions. So in one hand, we have a problem of excessive solar radiation, which is added to high diurnal temperature results in the overheating of classrooms and schoolyards, keeping children indoors during school breaks and affecting their well-being. And on the other hand, we have excessive solar radiation, which is a potential energy source mainly wasted in this context when it could actually be captured and shared with the neighborhood to generate electricity. So what we are doing here, instead of looking at the building, we look at the sites, we assess their conditions to host schools in different climatic regions, and then we use automated digital workflows to facilitate data collection, to run multi-domain simulations, and to categorize these sites to then test the potential of these classes to afford better uses of schoolyards when hosting governmental building typologies. And then finally, I would like to just show you an example of energy renovation, another PhD project, an energy renovation in rural China, where the key is to reduce carbon emissions, but in a top-down manner, and very much oriented to urban rather than rural communities. And what we have here is governmental retrofits seen by rural communities as inappropriate to their settlements and way of life, and villages directly involved, because the villages are directly involved in the construction of their houses. So they really refurbish them regularly and fulfill their own aspirations and sharing their experience. So what we did here is we tried to develop measures which work in rural context and try to get the buy-in of the end users. So how did we do that? We basically started working in close collaboration with this community, and we are trying to understand how they use energy in their houses so that we have more realistic energy retrofit measures to propose to them. We recorded indoor temperature conditions. We also talk to people and observe them and understand the way they live, they interact with their houses, they use energy, the way they capture it. So we did a lot of mixed method approach to really capture their aspirations and feelings and dreams for their houses, so that we try to create some sort of community-based data to feed and quality assure design processes. And this community-based data will be then disseminated to designers, and especially to the community of Annex 79, EU Build Up platform. So really sharing best practice, how to better understand ways of life and be able to respond to end user aspirations. So this was just quite a short presentation on possibilities to do things differently. And I hope through it I've sparked some ideas about what is needed for us to address the grand challenges. Basically, robust and systemic design methods to better deal with technical conflicts and risk management, embrace the digital revolution to develop transferable workflows that go beyond information modeling and parametric design, go beyond buildings and design them integrated into neighborhoods and cities, and properly engage with the end user as we design to enable ways of life and aspirations. So basically, my main message is our time of being superheroes is gone. And we have to be humble and learn as much as we can about people, the environment, and the planet, so we can design our built environment to become truly sustainable to nature and to people. And thank you all for listening. Please have a look at publications and references if you want about the topic. There is plenty there to be used to design a better world.
Thank you very much, Clarice, for the presentation. We've got one question from Radium here on the chat. It's how do we introduce the approach of generative design in our pedagogy, and especially in undergraduate?
Right. Well, we are trying to, we have now a big curriculum redesign, and we try to do an approach much more heavy-handed to technology, especially to quantify things. So year one, where I teach, we started doing introducing main metrics and key performance indicators for energy, for daylight, for solar radiation, all the lots of parameters, different parameters. We also look at pollution and different things, so that you can start understanding really what are the quantities involved and what are the basic things that we have to manage to measure and that we have to worry about. And then hopefully we will propagate that throughout the redesign and ask people to do more and more sophisticated analysis and implementation towards really being able to generate evidence for the design projects that the students produce.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Clarice, for the presentation and the answer.
Okay,
perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye. So now it's Menatalla's turn, and her. Let me introduce you properly. So Mena is an architect and a lecturer assistant at Zagazig University in Egypt, and currently a PhD candidate at the Welsh School of Architecture and a member of Welsh School of Architecture Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So your presentation is called Interactive Architecture for People with Learning Disabilities, utilizing co-design to move towards equitable public buildings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Federico. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfectly well.
Okay, so since the WSA exhibition theme this year is about the ongoing process, my talk today is about my ongoing PhD. I'm currently in year one, and my PhD is titled Interactive Architecture for People with Learning Disabilities, Utilizing Co-Design to Move Toward Equitable Public Buildings. Frank Gehry said that architecture is a small piece of human equation, but for those of us who practice it, we believe in its potential to make a difference, to enlighten and enrich the human experience, to penetrate the barriers of misunderstanding, and to provide a beautiful context for life's drama. And I really agree with this. I believe that architecture can enrich the human experience and can level up the quality of life for people. And maybe this was the main motive behind my PhD research. So as an introduction, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability is against any type of discrimination or exclusion on the basis of disability, and that all people are entitled to equal and fundamental freedoms, not based on their ability or disability. So what is disability? Disability is an umbrella term for impairment or activity limitation or participation restriction. And it has two definitions. The first one is the medical model of disability, which refers to disability as a health condition. The second definition is the social model of disability, which refers to it as contextual factor or environmental or social factor. And this definition, the world is trying to deal with disability based on this definition. Around the world, we have about 15% of the world population are people with disability, which accounts of 1 billion people around the world. And we have 3.5% of the world population are people with learning disability. And actually, these statistics aren't really accurate, since learning disability lacks accuracy usually in statistics. First, because of the varying views of disability that might lead the survey respondent to not consider themselves disabled. Second, the responses may be affected by the differing cultural concept of disability, and sometimes disability might be associated with feelings of shame, for example. And third, that statistics may be inconsistent due to the differing perception of disability. For example, in 2011, in the National Census Survey in the UK, the question about disability asked only whether the respondent have any long-standing health problem or disability. So these numbers tend to be less than the real numbers. So what is learning disability? Learning disability is a reduced intellectual ability, and it's not usually visible. So when you meet someone with a learning disability, you can't tell only by seeing him. People with learning disability need support in developing new skills, and they can have difficulty with their everyday activities, for example, managing money or doing home chores. If we have a look at these attributes or features of learning disability, we can see that if these people are interacting with building, architecture or the building can stress their disability, or it can make it visible. But the problem is they can't skip architecture, they can't skip dealing with building. Everyone deals with architecture every day. Libida Vario, an Italian art historian, said that architecture is the only art, pardon, you can't help but feel. You can avoid paintings, you can avoid music, and you can even avoid history. But good luck getting away from architecture. Looking at this, architects and designers have a responsibility to produce buildings that doesn't exclude anyone. The research problem, my research problem rose from 4 sections. First was the lack of architecture guidelines for people with learning disability. Although there is a lot of architecture guidelines for other types of disability, for example, physical impairment, which either incorrectly assume that existing regulations adequately fulfill the needs of these people, or it indicates that there is an insufficient understanding of their accessibility needs. And this is actually due to 2 reasons. First, the historical attitudes toward people with learning disability, as they were always subject to a type of discrimination and marginalization. And learning disability historically was considered contagious, and these people were institutionalized. The second is the nature of learning disability, because there is a limited knowledge about its causes and effects. The second section of the problem is the lack of building standards and regulations. If we have a look at Part M, which is the accessibility part in the UK building regulations, we will find that it is very light on any type of disability rather than wheelchair users, which actually only about 8% of all disabled people. The standards also requires the minimum from the designers. Furthermore, we need a better coherence and coordination between the different governmental bodies, for example, the planning, building regulation, Equality Act, transportation department. Third section is the architect's attitude towards learning disability. Usually, the primary focus of the architects is complying with the disability standard. They tend to categorize people with learning disability with people with impaired mobility. The knowledge is really limited about the accessibility needs of people with learning disability. The fourth section of the problem is lack of self-advocacy for people with learning disability. As I mentioned before, historically, they were subjected to type of discrimination and marginalization. In contrast, for example, for people with physical disabilities who have argued for their rights and have successful results from that. So what is my research aims to establish a framework of architecture design guidelines for people with learning disability. Discover how they interact with building and how they want to interact with building, using interactive tools to support this framework and while using co-design approach. The research methodology is prioritizing the perspective of people with learning disability. It's a practice-led approach. We'll start with analytical review of the literature and the case study analysis, which will not only focus on people with learning disability as the literature is really limited, but it will also focus on architecture and literature for people with autism. As people with autism, 50% of them have also a learning disability, so there is an overlap between two. Then the main chunk of the research is a participatory action research, which have 3 stages. We'll start with an exploratory survey, then a core survey, then co-design workshops, which will be joining the people with learning disability to design the framework. And the last stage is the framework testing, which will also be with the help of people with learning disabilities. So I keep saying interactive architecture, why I am using interactive architecture, and as a start, what is interactive architecture? Interactive architecture is based on the information exchange between a user and embedded computation in order to extend the daily activities we do within a space. And interactive systems can be used to support our physical environment with different solutions. Actually, I see that interactive architecture have a lot of potential to support with people with learning disability, and the potentials I'm going to discuss now aren't being used in the context of people with disability, and some of it aren't even being used in architecture context, while it have a big potential. The first potential is in supporting the predictability of a space. One of the most important problems that face people with learning disabilities is that they can hardly deal with the unfamiliar buildings or unfamiliar spaces. So using virtual reality, for example, we can give them a dry run in the space or the building before heading to it. And using sensors, we can give them a full sensory map of any building before entering it, mentioning, for example, what is the sensory inside a space. For example, how crowded is the space or how noisy is the space, which gives them an idea of it before entering it. Another potential is to support individuality and the flexibility. Using, for example, kinetic or interactive furniture, we can have different types of seating that may use the different needs of the different users. And we can use sensory hub or digital relaxation hubs that target different senses and that can support people whether they are hypostimuli or hyperstimuli. And also we can support different modes of lighting depends on the needs of the user. Facility management can also be great to use with interactive architecture, as it can be used to create a crowdsourced sensory map of the building and allowing the user to flag their sensory problem, for example, marking this place or flagging it as being really noisy or really crowded, which will help other users arriving to the space. And using these continuous feedback from people, we can in the future set or recommend the optimum sensory level we need. Another big problem that always face people with learning disability is the navigation and wayfinding. So using interactive architecture, we can give them a full map of the space, and this map will interact with them. As I said, it can give them a predictability of space before using it, but moreover, it can suggest another route for them. For example, if a certain route is really noisy for them or maybe really crowded, it can support with finding other routes that can be more comfortable for them. And also use augmented reality. It can be used to navigate through unclear or inaccessible signage. So with all these potentials in mind, I think that interactive architecture can really have great potentials in supporting our buildings and making it more inclusive. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mena. I'll be taking up questions now. Romena, I've got mine, of course, prepared. I'd like to know if there's anyone who'd like to put some questions on the chat. Okay, I will ask mine, Mena. So I think it's really interesting the different strategies that you started presenting on interactive architecture. I was wondering, while I was listening to you, I was wondering how the users with learning disabilities could as well. How could we support them in interacting with the proper spatial qualities of the spaces? So spatial qualities intended from the modernist concepts, from Le Corbusier, so morphology, materials, natural light, plus the Lefebvrean notion from the 60s onward of the space as a social product. Therefore, we can work with these 4 levels, in combination to understand what spatial qualities could be related when it comes to architectural design. So I wonder if there might be as well ways of enhancing the legibility of those spatial qualities from the proper architectural design field with these combined four levels. If you have some ideas in that respect, or if something can be made.
I think actually the problem is that there is really limited literature touching people with learning disability. If we had a look at, we will find that the work is really scattered. So people, for example, will only focus on the navigation and wayfinding, or they will maybe focus on the lack of the literature about that. So I think that I will be working as a holistic framework. I won't be focusing on a certain architecture element, but I will try to produce a holistic framework so we can work on the different levels of architecture, not only a certain one. But so far, if someone wants to read more about the architecture for people with learning disability, it's maybe to look at work on people with autism, and we have a great talk about that in our day 3. But generally, the literature about people with learning disability is really limited.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we can have other conversations in that very interesting topic in MAD as well. So we've got another question from Radium. Wonderful topic, Mena. How will you collaborate with communities with these disabilities? How would be the way of approaching those communities?
I have already created a collaboration with Cardiff People First, which is a charity organization for people with learning disability, and I am having a co-researcher to support the research. The co-researcher has a learning disability, and she has been doing a great job in pushing me toward a more accessible means of communication with people with learning disability. So it will be through organizations, and I'm seeking collaboration with more organizations. But Cardiff People First is one of the organizations that really supports the advocacy of people with learning disability. So it supports that people with learning disability should speak for themselves, which is the main focus of my research.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any? It's just 7 o'clock. I think we've been quite good at the timing. Is there any other final burning question that anyone would like to ask Mena on this topic, or should we go directly to the next presenter?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So let's proceed with the next presenter. I will leave you, Mena, to present Marianna. Okay. Thank you very much.
So our next presenter is Marianna Marchesi. Marianna is a lecturer in architecture and urban design, a researcher and an architect. First joined the Welsh School of Architecture in 2018 as Marie Curie Fellow for implementing a research project called Circubit. The project focused on exploring how urban communities like social housing can contribute to the transition to a circular economy. And her talk is titled Circubit, Transitioning Towards Sustainable Circular Cities. Over to you, Marianna.
Okay, thank you for this invitation. I will just share the screen. Okay. Yeah, I will move. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I will. Okay. So I will move ahead. So my research, Circubit, was developed thanks to the support of the European Commission, and the research focus on applying a circular economy. A circular economy is an approach that is restorative and regenerative by design. So it aims to replace the current approach to resource management that is linear and based on the action of take, make, and dispose, with an approach that is circular, in which the action are take, make, and recover. So it aims to reduce waste, regenerate natural system, and extend resource service life as much as possible. But I specifically focus on application of this process, this approach in city. So if you look at this diagram, it's showing how resources currently in city are used in a linear way. So we use water, food, energy for living, working, but these resources are managed in a way that at the end they produce waste in different way, emission and pollution, as well as goods in a large amount, while applying a more regenerative and restorative approach would help to use these resources in a circular way to reduce as much as possible pollution, waste, maintain resources in use as much as possible, as well as a regenerative natural system. But what in my research I specifically observe that resource efficiency in city depend on consumption and production pattern that are linked to citizen behavior. If you look at this diagram, it's showing the ecological footprint of Cardiff. The bigger amount are, in this evaluation are mainly due to way of living, and specifically and at food and drink consumption, mobility pattern, energy use, and consumable use and dispose. The circular economy, the research on the circular economy is currently mainly looking at the way to implement this approach from the technological point of view. However, if you wish, a systemic change towards sustainability can be only achieved if you combine social and technical innovation. Therefore, I focus on how, on the social aspect, and specifically how citizens can contribute to a circular economy and the implementation of a sustainable circular city, and how they can be engaged. So the research specifically try to uncover the social level of the approach in order in future to combine the social technical aspect and achieving a systemic change toward sustainability. Specifically, I look at what drives cities in practice to prioritize circular production and consumption strategy, like reducing repair, reusing, refurbishing. I explore initiatives that citizens are already implementing and that engage them in different practice towards circular production and consumption practice, like reducing, repairing, reusing. And I explore a large amount of initiative across system, product, food, build, green infrastructure, and mobility. And I discover that this intervention are engage citizens in community, group of interest, business and social enterprise that co-create solutions for a circular behavior, which align individual interests with social and environmental benefit. So I explore initiative in the building sector, green infrastructure, product sector, food sector, and mobility sector. From this large analysis, I analyze, identify pattern and common aspect that allow me to identify 7 types of circular citizen. And for each citizen, I define main feature, main action, challenges, and impact. So I discovered that there are mainly 3 types of circular citizen: the do-it-together citizens, sharing citizen, and strategic citizen. They work in a group, in long-term community, group of interest, short-term group, to implement production, consumption practice and consumption practice for a circular economy. I discovered that there are do-it-yourself citizen and census citizen. They focus on individual competence in improving their skill or in producing knowledge based on the use of technology toward circular practice. And finally, I discovered citizens that are mainly entrepreneur. They focus on alternative material arrangement. They are zero waste citizen and utility-oriented citizen. They look at waste as a resources or at providing service instead of ownership. For this taxonomy will be employed to identify recommendation for policymakers to support, include support strategy to promote citizen engagement and contribution in the circular economy, as well as I focus on my research in providing these results to citizens. So I developed a card game to engage citizens in understanding what a circular economy is and what they can do. So I developed a card game. This card game is called Circular Families, can be downloaded for free from the project web page. You can print at home, cut and play. The game is composed of 14 circular families across all urban sector. Each circular family is composed of 4 members: take, make, use, and recover. Player play the game to exchange cards to build their circular family in a sector. You can see the product that I developed, and I'm using this tool to engage citizen, social enterprise, and I also use this tool with students as in a play discovery section to understand what a circular economy is and what citizens can do to implement a circular economy. This card game is used as a discover tool, while I'm also proceeding in this process, helping citizens in developing social innovation for a circular economy by co-design section and prototype section. So I'm specifically implementing a second project called CircuPlay, in which I'm looking to develop a playful platform to engage and support citizens in renting, repairing, reusing, collecting, for accessing existing facility, and in this engaging them through gamification, co-creation, and technology, as well as I'm testing the game and this process in supporting a community in developing a community food hub to deal with current food cost increase by local food economy, resource circularity, and a new business model. Through this process, I aim to develop a toolkit in which the card game will be part as a brainstorming tool, but this toolkit will be composed of a set of workshops that I'm currently testing and an assessment tool to support the development of social combined with technological innovation for a circular economy. This tool should help to overcome specific challenge that I identify in my project, in the Circular project, that are commonly observed in this type of initiative. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marianna. Thank you. We will be taking any questions from Marianna through the Q&A function or through the chat box. First of all, I would like to say something myself. I really like the way of collaboration and that you have found a way to collaborate, especially with the non-architects, the way of having a game to engage different people and different discipline. I believe really it's a great way, because I myself am collaborating with non-architects, and sometimes sometimes it's really hard to reach the architect. We are always tend to talk to architects, so it sometimes can be really tricky to talk to non-architects to reach an architecture framework. So I think it's really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I can't see any questions so far, but I have a question myself. Do you have any advices, especially for the undergrads, to adapt this mindset of having a circular design of or how do you think that we can adapt this in teaching, especially in undergrad?
I already engaged students in design for circular economy. So I test, and I'm also using the game as a brainstorming tool just to understand the approach. So in terms of design, I engage them at different level of design. Initially at the urban level, understanding issue in different urban system in terms of resources. So how you can imagine the waste is managed, or how, for example, the mobility is managed, if there are any specific issue, and also food, and looking at these different resources and urban system, I engage students in try to implement this circular approach in each system. So specifically at the urban scale, I engage a student in working in group, focusing individually at a specific sector, and after that working collaboratively to define a common plan for a circular neighborhood. So they imagine a neighborhood in which people can grow their food. They can have, for example, space for repairing, or a product hub where they can repair and resell. So they try to design space for engaging, for promoting circular production and consumption practice, as well as going at the lower level. Students focus on designing a specific space, a public space or a community space for circular practices, as well as they focus on designing a building by applying this principle. So a few students focus on disassemble principle, other focus on the possibility on modularity. So they have been engaged at different level on this concept, and try to apply this approach consistently across urban levels.
Thank you for this informative answer. We have a question from Clarice. She's saying, can you please tell us what is the status of the project? Is it at its end?
So see, the Circubed, the game and the taxonomy is ended, even if, and now I'm collecting impact. So I presented the project.
No, you're froze.
Sorry?
We lost you for a minute. Can you repeat? I'm sorry.
Okay, so Circubed, the project is finished. And I'm collecting impact. I presented the game in different sections, and I'm collecting feedback, and I'm trying to engage participants in following section for co-designing. However, I'm I'm proceeding developing funding from Circubed in a second project that is called Circuple, that I'm currently developing. but is mainly focusing on engaging a community in developing a social innovation for a circular economy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marianna. Thank you for sharing this with us. This is the end of our event. I would like to thank all our attendees and all our speakers. And I would like to invite you to attend our second day of the festivals, which will be tomorrow at 4 p.m. And the theme is representation and experimental. And we will be having 2 lectures from guest speakers. At 4 o'clock, we will be having a lecture titled Computational Design Thinking by Georgina Myers. And at 5 p.m., we will be having a lecture titled Architecture and the Chamber of Information by Alexandros Kilagis. Thank you all and have a lovely evening.